Let me turn the volume up. Everybody's a wee bit quiet.
Are we?
No, we're just not talking.
That's never been used to describe either William or I.
Nor me. Given that only the loud Scots bloke, so you know.
Yeah. So it may be we three. Everybody else seemed to have some other stuff. We may have Evie from Evie's Review may show up. She's going to talk about her adapter for the, let's see if I've got it here, her all-in-one cartridge, which is kind of nice. It's not specific to the Aquarius, but it does allow you to load ROM cartridges at will. So it's kind of interesting. But she may or may not show up, but that's fine. Okay, so let's bang the gavel and make this happen. My name is Sean Harrington. For everybody watching on live or after the fact on YouTube, William, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm William Hicks, also known as 8-Bit Milli or Millie. From 8-Bit Milli Games / Retro Gamers Club / 8-Bit Milli website / 8-Bit Milli YouTube channel / it used to be Retro System Rescue, but that's me.
Okay, so I guess it's me then.
Yes.
Right, hello, so I'm Roy Templeman, also known as the Loud Scots Bloke. Where do I start? I've had an Aquarius since I was 10 years old. Most of you know the story. I've recently, over the last few years, thanks to lockdown, started writing new games for the Aquarius. I've now got 3 games on sale, Aquariworm, Bombcatcher 2, and the new Doomsday Defender, which came out recently. I've got a new game in the pipeline, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, no, big fan of the Aquarius, always have been. I collect and repair retro machines. It's my hobby. I've got about 150 machines in my collection now. That doesn't include duplications. That's all unique machines. And I love the underdogs. I love the fact that I love machines that just try but never really get there. Obviously, I've got all the common machines like the Commodores and the Speckies and the Amstrads, etc. But they're not really my passion. My passion is the machines that aren't very good. And of course, the Aquarius kind of falls into that bucket. It's renowned for being terrible, but I don't think she's terrible. I think the wee blue key is awesome.
We do too. And I guess I'll go back a little bit for me. I've told the story several times. Kind of like Roy, I've had one since I was a little older than him. I got mine on closeout at a chain here called KB Toys. Well, a chain in the States called KB Toys. They typically would put the closeout items at the front of the store to draw you into the back of the store. And I think I spent a grand $100 at the most for the bundle, which included the Aquarius, the mini expander for, I actually got 3 games and a 4K cartridge. Then I also got the controllers, and it was good. You know, I didn't know what I had at the time, so like an idiot, I donated it. So I had to pay top dollar when I got back into it, back in 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
And I guess my claim to fame is that I reverse engineered both the motherboard. I don't have one handy, but I reverse engineered the motherboard and the mini expander and made them open source. So anybody who wants to develop new or hacked hardware without messing up the originals can do that. Also did one of these, which is a coveted clicky key version, but it only works if you have a pin header installed, which you can do. But of course, it doesn't fit in a case. So one of my many to-do list items is to kind of create a new case for the stock Aquarius, so you can put something like this on. Yeah.
I was going to say that, Sean. Are you planning on modeling the new case on the Aquarius 2 design?
I don't know. I mean, it certainly will fit. It's pretty close in specs. There's lots of room in the Aquarius 2 case once you get the everything going up. But I think we can do better if we do that. I think we maybe we can have RGB or at least composite out. Oh, William, that's what I was telling you. I was doing the composite mod to one of TJ's Aquariuses, and he was having problems with SysROM 1. And here's my current collection of SysROMs. But I also have let's see if I can show it here. I also have a little sysrom switcher that will allow you to set jumpers with a standard WinBond 64K memory thing. So, and there's a little switch. So with the Aquarius, there's not much room beneath the keyboard, so you have to really keep it low profile on that.
Right.
But I fixed that, and then on the other one, I was able to put in one of the RGB to HDMI mods. So he's actually going to have an HDMI out Aquarius, which should be good. And it already had an S2 ROM in it. What I'd like to do, speaking of the Aquarius 2, is I'd like to be able to create a ROM that still uses the WinBond ROMs, but will have both the extended basic in the 4K whole and as well as the S2 ROM, so that people can have basically the functionality of an Aquarius 2 without having to, plug in a cartridge, because it's kind of nice to have that extended basic in there without having to have a cartridge on top of it. And I know you can do that with with the mini expander and stuff like that, but it's kind of nice. So William,
yes.
tell us about Turmoil 2022 and how you got here.
All right, well, I'll give you a little bit more background too. I've been doing this tinkering computers since '82. My first computer was the Timex Sinclair 1000. So I started out with the bad orphan, the little baby. But I loved that little thing, and I played with it like crazy. And then I moved on to the Ataris. I dabbled in the Commodores, and personally, I mean, Commodores are great, but I was an Atarian, so Commodores were commies. I didn't want nothing to do with them. And the Apple was the same thing. In school, it was apples, but at home, I didn't want an Apple. I wanted Atari. But I've had just about every computer I could ever find, except some of the ones out of Europe and the ones out of South America and the ones out of Russia. But every other computer, I mean, last time I counted about, I think it was 2011, I counted up all my systems. I sat down one day and just wrote a list, and I had over 60 different computer types. And that's not like just models, like one model and next. These are actual computer types. And the vast majority of them were Z80 based, so because I normally like them. And then back in 2015, a long time ago, I had a Coleco Atom, and when my my one and only data pack died, I was stuck. So I eventually sold it for parts, but kept the disk drive, which I plugged into an Atari as a second disk drive. But back in 2015, I got back into the Atoms and started tinkering with them. And last year, I decided I moved out of my home office into a big office to give my daughter a room at home. And once I moved into an office here, I decided I'm going to see if I can turn my hobby into some money, because I have a lot of free time. Because my normal time is I just write psychological testing, online psychological testing. That's what I do day and night. That's my career. And I have, out of a 40-hour week, I have 39 hours to kill. So those 39 hours, I am 100% coding retro stuff or doing retro things. I do it. It's basically my job. And I started last year. I said, okay, I'm gonna start writing games instead of just dabbling. I'm gonna write games and see if I can sell them. And after I did the third game on the ColecoVision, I looked around and I said, I like the Aquarius. I've never had an Aquarius. I've read about them for the past 3 or 4 years on everything I could find. So I picked up an Aquarius and I decided I'm going to start writing for the Aquarius because it's a Z80 system. So I said, it's not much different than the Atom. I mean, the video is different, the input output's different, but other than that, the thought processes are the same, similar. You don't have interrupts in there, so that kind of kills some things. But I was able to take Turmoil, which Turmoil was based on a game that came out in '82 for the Atari 2600, which I had never known about. I was a big Atari 2600 guy back then, and I'd never seen Turmoil at all. And a friend of mine showed me it last year and said that he always wanted to learn how to code to write this. And I looked at it and said, you mind if I write it? Because I looked at the game and I thought it was kind of interesting. It would give something that is a simple game, but it was fun to play. So after I wrote it there, I said, I'm gonna move to the Aquarius. So I got an Aquarius and I've been learning since then. And it's a nice computer to program on. It does have its drawbacks, but since it has limitations, you can exploit those limitations and make it work better. Whereas if you got a computer where you have a ton of possibilities to do everything, you never use them all. And you end up with programs that don't look like they take advantage of the system.
Yeah, you wind up like an 8-year-old at a buffet. There's so much there's so much choice you don't know what to do. Whereas with the simplicity of a character-based system like what the Aquarius has, you focus on the gameplay aspects of it. So.
Right. So what I did is I took my code, I ported it over. I do everything in Linux in my emulator. I was in Windows and I got tired of updates. A year and a half ago, I just got tired of updates, so I moved to Linux. So I took my ColecoVision code over into it. I branched it off and I started a new one in the Aquarius. I downloaded Aqualight emulator and I took all my code and it's already been basically broken up, but I separated out the sprite routines and I separated out the sound routines and the input routines from everything else. And then I started writing equivalents. I don't have sprites on the Aquarius, but I could write equivalents. So I started figuring out how to do equivalents for that. The input output routines was actually really easy, except for keyboard to keyboard on the Aquarius is a little messy, but trying to read it in machine language. So I kind of did a hack job on it, which works really good. Instead of because I didn't want to take advantage of anything. Like I looked at the basic disassembly and I said, okay, I could take advantage of basic and X basic for key press and stuff. But I said, I don't want to take advantage. I don't want to use any other code but what is on the cartridge if I can. So I spent time and basically I think, okay, if you do an input from a certain port, you're reading the keypad or the keyboard, but you have to set it up first. I said, well, I don't want to set it up. I'm just going to input. I'm going to see what I can get. So I started decoding the keys and I found the keys I wanted to use. So the keyboard routines could use a lot of work, but then again, it's very quick and fast. The video routines is probably the easiest part to do video in Aquarius. I mean, yeah, you are stuck with the character-based things, but the characters give you a lot of options. The graphics give you a lot of options, and the character, the display is actually very clean. So it's not like you have chunky, ugly characters. And you got 40 columns wide, which is nice. Coming from a lot of the older systems that didn't have 40 columns. Most of the Z80 systems, the ZX8 or the ZX80s, the Spectrums and so forth, they didn't have 40 columns, they had 32. So it's a nice system. So what do we want to know about how I did it?
Well, let's pause there for a second. Evie Salomon joined us. Hey, Evie, great to see you online. William, 8-Bit Milli, is just going through kind of how he got into developing for.
Hello.
Hello. Hey, Evie.
Hey. Let me just get my camera set up here. Hello.
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 How you doing?
Great. That's a lot of computers. Why don't we pause for just a second?
Actually.
Oh my gosh. Let's pause for a second. Evie, what we did was Millie, Roy, and I each did a little bit of an intro. You want to tell us a little bit about what brought you to retro computers? And
well, I've actually always been there ever since I was like 5 years old. So the story is, when I was 5 years old, I'd get out of the bath and I'd run to the Timex Sinclair. That was the first thing I'd want to do.
That was the machine that kind of brought Millie in as well too.
And then after that, my brother got into the Commodore 64, and he'd always like bring his friends over, and we'd play Commodore 64, and like they were really big into like Ultima 4 or Ultima 3 and Ultima 4, and even like card games like Illuminati, the Steve Jackson games. And so basically, when I was a kid, my older brother, he was like maybe about 5 years older than me, still is, and you know, he would be playing all these games with his friends, and you know, I would always be there and just, you know, wanting to play along.
Cool. And do you have a time crunch? I want to make sure we.
No. Okay. I've actually been up all night. I've actually been up all night working on the Aquarius.
Oh.
I was putting it off because I was finishing up work on the PC Junior.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, these machines are, you get deep into something and it's a big time sink.
Yeah.
So before the PC Junior, I was working on the Apple II, and I had to take a break from that because I broke my 2C.
Yeah.
Anyway, so here, can you see? I don't know, it's probably too bright. I think I got to turn the brightness down somehow. Turn it off real quick and back on. So that is Backbit running on Aquarius, but of course it's too bright, so you can't. Let's see if I can turn the brightness down. You talk amongst yourselves while I figure this out.
No problem. Okay, so William, go ahead and tell us a little bit about developing Turmoil. You talked about how you kind of got there, but
Right. Sure. All right. So yeah, like I said, I originally wrote it on the ColecoVision, but once I moved it over to the Aquarius, I started. My first thought was, as I said, I'll split off the things that are different, the video, the input output, and the audio, and then use the original code that I had in the ColecoVision for it. And that's what I started doing. I realized I had interwoven into that original code so much ColecoVision stuff that I just, after about 2 or 3 days of going through and patching, I said, enough. I took the vast majority of the code, set to the side, and I said, I'm going to make a work-alike. I'm not going to try to convert this code over because it was never written to be converted.
right.
It was written for speed on the ColecoVision. So yeah, when I started.
Did you find somebody else's registers file, or did you have to create your own?
For
mapping the memory locations, so they meant something. Like for the character, like for the screen, there's a reg file out there that a lot of people use. For,
no, actually, I used the I don't know if it was you or somebody sent me a preliminary write-up of like mapping the Aquarius, and I used that to get me started. And once I had some ideas of where things are going, I mean, it's, as I said, I had the disassembly of the basic, and I guess the basic does contain some of the OS in it too, like some of the other systems do. When I looked at that, I realized I don't want to tinker with that because, like other computers, the basic in the Aquarius is written to be optimized for it, and it's really not designed for you to like call a routine to hit something. It's all interwoven into each other. So I just decided, okay, I know where the basic is, and I'm going to stay away from it. I know where the screen is at. I know how to talk to the key or read from the keyboard, how to read from the joystick if you have one, and how to talk to the AY and to the beeper. And other than that, I didn't need to care about what was going on in the Aquarius at that point. I don't use cassette input, so I never even bothered to look at how to do that yet.
Okay.
Which someday I will learn. But yeah, once I had set my parameters as to how I'm going to interface and work with the Aquarius, then it was pretty easy because I'm just work. I mean, the nice thing about the Aquarius is that the memory, the video is memory mapped and it's in a specific location. No, it did throw me off that the top left-hand corner is also border color. That kind of threw me for.
Yeah, but only in the so-called invisible top line.
25th row, yeah.
I looked at that.
We all use that. It's brilliant. It's the best way of changing that background color.
I do actually take advantage of 25 lines. I just avoid those corners. I use all the screen.
Most people do.
Yeah.
And for anybody in the chat who hasn't seen it, do look up Matt Pills's excellent Aquarius Draw. It is a screen drawing program. He's now included the 25th row, and he has some machine code extracts. So if you want to, you can do a straight memory dump, or you can do a basic. It's a little slow to draw the screen. Or you can output to a Caq file and use either PASM or Tasmo to compile it into a Caq file. So, all right. So you want to show us what you got, or
I could try to share my screen here.
Is it a little bit more legible now?
It is. It looks good.
Yeah, I have to use this TV because my other setup, one of my adapters makes it black and white. And then my other adapter, the screen's all shaking around like crazy. So I have to just plug it straight into this TV.
William, if you want to, hold on a second, Eve. If you want to try and see if you can get your emulator running to show off Turmoil really quickly, and we'll let.
Yeah, I got it up. I just got to figure out how I can share a screen here. I never shared a screen yet.
Gotcha. It is
now.
Bottom of the screen. There's a green share screen up arrow.
I got it. I'm good now. I got it. Yeah. All right, so you want to see the game? You want to see code? What would you like to see?
Let's start off with the game, and then you can show us behind the kimono.
Okay, I'm going to share that right now. I guess I am sharing my screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right.
I do have one question. Does Milli refer to Milli Vanilli?
Absolutely.
Actually, yes, it does. And you see that little logo right there? That's the Running Man from their albums. I used to love their music that they didn't sing.
Well, I watched there was an interview with the guy who's still alive, Rob.
That's Fab is still alive. Rob is
alive. Fab. Okay, an interview with Fab on this YouTube called Valuetainment. It's an interesting interview with him recently, sort of recently.
Yeah, I used to talk back and forth with Fab a lot via Twitter and Facebook. It was fun.
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
you know him?
I knew him through there. He kind of noticed me because I went by the name Millie, and my last fight said Millie Vanilli, and here I am, a white bald guy, and I'm going by the name Millie.
Yeah.
It's fun. I mean, it doesn't hurt that Millie is really close to Billy, which is what I was called all my life, so it doesn't, it fits in. So here we go. We got, this is the title screen, and I'd like to thank Sean for creating the logo because it looks really nice. So this is right now, and I still have to come in and I got to tinker a few things. I got to change the name of the O blank pipes so that it is exclamation point instead of an I. This is the Kickstarter version, whether you get both games. So I'm going to, actually, let me just restart it just so you see the whole thing. It's the beep. And the way the game first starts up, it wants to know what game you want to play. If you back the campaign, you get the screen. Otherwise, you don't see this. It goes straight to the turmoil screen. If you back the campaign, it will have a display where you can play either game. So when you first start up, you go to turmoil. Then it wants to know if you want to play a keyboard or a hand controller. I'm going to use a keyboard because Aqualight, if I switch to hand controller, the sound goes all crazy. So I'm going to go to keyboard. And keyboard uses, it's in the manual. The keyboard uses for movement I, J, K, and M, space to fire, 3 to drop a nuke. So this is your screen right here. It gives you your scores for each individual piece that you have. You press fire to continue. Then you need to select which battle you want to play. This is what differs from the original one from 40 years ago. The original one, it was just the game. You played the game until you got bored and stopped playing. And what I did when I set it up last year on the ColecoVision that I carried over to here is instead I turned it into, so there's some kind of challenge to it. As you go along, each battle is a little harder. And in the manual, there's actually backstories, tells you what each one does. And in some, like in Recon over Rio, you may not have certain enemies to fight. In Armageddon, you have every enemy to fight. So I'm just going to select one player by pressing fire, select Recon over Rio and press fire. It gives you a little backstory of what it is, just telling you what's going on. Press fire again to start. And we're playing, and I died. Now this is used in a combination of, I am very bad at playing games on computer keyboard because I keep looking down to see where the keys are. So I die. But as you can see, the way the game plays is we're going up and down, trying to destroy the enemies. I love programming. I suck at playing, just so you know. I really do suck at it. As a keyboard, because I keep looking down, am I on the right key? And by the time I look up, I'm dead.
Yeah.
I just can't play with a keyboard. I have never been able to my whole life. But the concept behind the game is that you are moving. Let's restart it again here. You are moving. Keyboard, fire, fire, fire. You are moving up and down, and there's me taking advantage of that border color for the nuke. When I see how this whole border turns red, I took advantage of the fact that if you put a color in that top corner, it changes the border. But what you're doing is you're moving up and down, trying to keep these lanes clear as they're attacking you. And there's various ones that are attacking you, and you shoot at them. Some of them are, you can't hurt. Some of them fire at you, like that yellow one down there is a cannon, it's gonna fire at me eventually. There are, let me go back in here. I'm gonna go to the hard one so that you actually see.
Oh, that was the easy one? Holy cow.
That was the easy one, yeah. I'm gonna go to Armageddon where you get everybody. And now in Armageddon, now you have tanks. You have tanks among other things. Oh, stop running into things. See, some of them don't die. Then you can't kill certain ones. You shoot them like crazy and they just won't die unless you shoot them in the back.
Gotcha.
Other ones come after you. These are tanks. And just so you see, I can't shoot those tanks from the front or those ships from the front. I can only shoot them from the back. And let me just exit out of there again.
It reminds me of Tapper a little bit.
A little bit, kind of like a cross between Space Zap and Tapper.
Yeah.
There is no pausing in the game. It just keeps getting faster and faster. And after you finish each level, the border screens change color, and sometimes they go away completely so you don't see the walls. And it just keeps going. There's 255 levels, and at 255 it maxes out on the speed. And I've never seen anybody get that high on the ColecoVision. I don't know how you're going to get on this one. Maybe a little easier on this one because the ColecoVision was a little bit faster because I was using a non-maskable interrupts. And this one I couldn't do that, so I couldn't, like on the CV.
You had to count cycles.
Yeah, right. On the CV, I'm getting an interrupt every 60. I'm 60 frames a second. I'm getting an interrupt, so I could ignore every other interrupt, and then later on acknowledge every interrupt. So I'm doubling the speed. Whereas on the Aquarius, I am, as you said, counting cycles, which actually works out pretty good because what I did is my code is in the beginning, and here, I'm going to stop sharing for a second so that you can actually see me because I like to wave my hands. My code is actually in the beginning of the main loop, and then once the main loop is done, it goes into a cycle loop.
Yeah.
Where in that cycle loop, it is playing any sounds it needs to play. And depending on what it's doing and the speed I want, it may sit in there for 60,000 cycles. It may sit in there for 20,000 cycles, depending on how to speed up. But it works out really well because with the Aquarius, I'm not getting interrupted by anything. So I'm not going to have a time where the Aquarius comes to a dead stop because it's updating the screen.
Right.
Whereas on the other hand, I may be updating the screen where in the Aquarius is wanting to display the screen, so I have to catch that. And that was fun to figure that one out. So that is Turmoil. It's a simple game, but I've never seen anybody beat it. Well, there really is no beating it, but I've never seen anybody say I maxed out the score, which is, I think it's 8 digits wide.
Wow.
Was it 8 or 6? I think it was 8 digits wide. So yeah. What would that be? 999 million, something like that. That'd be kind of hard.
Cool. So do you want to show us some code, or do you want to show us the pipes game?
Yeah, let me just do a quick. I mean, everybody knows what pipes is, or AKA Flappy Bird, and I'm still working on adding sound to the Flappy Bird, which won't be a lot of sound, but just enough to make it more. So let's just go in here. I mean, the controls on this one are easy. Keyboard or hand controller. At this point, it really doesn't matter, but I do use that just because if you tell it you want keyboard, it's never going to look at the hand controller. If you tell it you want hand controller, it's never look at the keyboard. I'm not checking both. Though I did originally when I did write, I said if you selected the hand controller, then it's only going to make sound out the AY chip, which is on the mini expander. And if you select a keyboard, it's using a beeper. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to do both. If you don't have a mini expander, it's not going to hurt to have me send out sound because there's nothing there to catch it. And if you do have it, if you have the mini expander, you hear better sound. Plus you hear the beeper, so you get even more sounds. So it seems to work out better that way. So yeah. This one right here is very simple. You just push your buttons to stay alive. And I love how using the built-in graphics, I was able to get a very smooth scroll here. And originally I was getting a tearing, where every now and again I would get a black line go across the graphics. And I got to fix this because there's no way I'm getting up that high. That's one of those ones where I got to correct it because you're just not going to beat the game.
Right.
But I figured out how to, I figured out how to catch the video updating. So when it goes to display, to update the screen, it checks to see if the Aquarius is in the middle of drawing video. If it is, then it just waits till it gets done. But it doesn't, I mean, every now and again, you can see a slight, if you watch the screen, every now and then you can see a slight stutter. That's when I happen to catch it when the Aquarius is updating the screen. But I don't think, it doesn't slow the game down at all. So it gives a nice clean, I'm not making it out there. It gives a nice clean video display. And you don't get any breaking. Before I was getting like a black line every now and then, which is really nice. I didn't think I was going to be able to get rid of that. I thought I was going to be stuck with the fact that my code is stepping on the video chip.
Yep. Thank goodness the Aquarius has those progressive horizontal pixel things where it goes through 1 through 8 pixels.
Yeah, I'm actually using those designs right there in the ColecoVision version of it because I actually like the way the graphics played out. I'm going to use the exact same way because I mean all I have to do is just change the I think it's 2 graphics characters and 2 colors, and the whole thing updates based on that. It's really easy to move things around.
Cool. All right, show us a little code.
All right, so let's do the coding is my thing, so I have more fun with that. Let's say. So let's go to code. All right, so we're looking at some code here. Let's just move around here. First off, what I'm using is Microsoft Visual Studio. It's a free download, and you can download it, and you can basically use it with any programming language you want. It's just an IDE. It has a lot of features I do not take advantage of.
So you're using the code version, right?
Yes. And what I did is there's a couple of things you can download to include into this little libraries that lets you do certain things, like if you hover over an opcode, it tells you how big the opcode is. If you highlight some things, it tells you how many cycles it takes. So there's a lot of useful features in here. So what I do is when I do my coding, I break it down into as many small pieces as possible. Instead of one long code, I break it down into a whole bunch of small codes. In this case, I got turmoil as my main code, and then it includes other things. It includes equates, like the first included would be the equates, which is just me setting up what different things do. You can notice some of the numbers in here, the colors that are available and so forth, and my macros. Other things I do is I set up my memory register so I know where memory's at. This way, nothing's hard coded. If I want to move things around, I can see it. I even got up here too. This right here, this extra RAM coding right here is not used inside of here as much as it will be used when I make the basic, or not the basic, the cassette version of it, so I can move the code to where it belongs when I compile it. So as you see, when I write up here, I do all my equates in here where I set up all the various things for the game. And since there's 2 games in here, I have 2 separate chunks of equates. And then just to show you some things in here, for instance, this is my sprite routines. Well, I would call the sprite routines with one of these sprites in here, and every sprite is a 4-character block, which is a top left, top right, bottom left, bottom right. And I would just call my, let's see, do I have the actual sprite routine in this one here, or is that in screen? Let's see, sprite routine and explosions. These are sprite setups. Where did I put it at in here? Am I missing? Is something not loaded in here? Bear with me a moment here. Video. Yeah, I don't have video loaded in here. Let me load video up. Where am I at? Almost there. Hold on a second. Includes video right there. Okay. Loaded up the video routines there too. I have this set up so that all my includes that aren't game specific are going to be shareable with any game I write. So if I want to draw a sprite on a screen, instead of printing to the screen, I actually load a sprite in the register, and I set up my register with HL holds the sprite address, and I set up the DE with the position of where I want it to be on the screen. And I just call draw sprite, and it does everything for me. It draws a sprite, erases what was behind it, and moves things around. And it works out really well. So that even though I don't have sprites, I can have sprites on here. I can set up a sprite, like for instance, if you see how a sprite is set up here, the erase sprite is just 4 spaces in the background color. The right-facing player sprite, these are the characters, and these are the colors used for those characters. And I don't have to ever think about that again. I just want to draw a sprite. I just go there and draw a sprite. And as I told Sean before, mid-May, I will be releasing the fully commented source code for these games in one long file so that people can read them. Because if you notice, I do a lot of commenting on my stuff. Anything that, I mean, I've been told I over comment. I mean, yeah, I know. They're like, why do you have to put the word no? Because it helps me 6 months down the road to look at it and figure out what was I doing.
Absolutely, and the compiler doesn't care. It's going to strafe those out anyway.
So I will be releasing this code so that everybody can just look at stuff and either look at how to do things or look at how I did it and say I did it wrong.
Yeah. Well, kudos to that. And again, I do look forward to if you're up for the time, I would look forward to you going through in depth, how you used Visual Studio Code, also the compiler that you're using, I've started using that more myself for some of the projects that I'm working on, but I look forward to that. So.
Right. Yeah. Let me. I'll just show you. Yeah, I didn't show that part. Let me just quickly show you how I compile the things too. What screen can I? I'm going to share. I'm going to share. Let's see where we at. Let me open up my DOSBox emulator so I can share that. Yeah, I emulate versus. I close that out so it sees DOSBox. Now I'll go back again. There we go. As I said, I'm running Linux, and on Linux I use Wine to emulate Windows, and then I use Aqualite to emulate the Aquarius, and then I use DOSBox to emulate DOS because my compiler that I use, the TASM compiler, the Telemark compiler, which I've heard runs on the Windows, but it won't run on the Winlight and it won't run in Linux, so I have to use the DOSBox version of it. So I go in here and let's see. I can, what was it? I just use the DOSBox and the TSM compiler. It takes all my code, does a nice quick compile, creates a nice little, creates a ROM file for me, pads it out the way it needs to be. And I will show everybody how I do that too it is overly complicated, but then again, it's very easy to work with. So I will show how that's done too, with like Sean was saying, when I explain how things are done.
Cool. Yeah, and most people who are going to be using Windows anyway can just run the TASM compiler if they want to do that. The nice part about Visual Studio Code is, aside from the fact that it's cross-platform, is people can update the task.json file to actually execute those compile commands if you want to. There's a set of build tasks that you can use that can run that, and it'll actually kick off Aqualite if you wanted to. So.
Yeah, I actually got it to do that on my laptop when I was tinkering with my laptop on my Linux one. I got within the Visual Studio Code, be able to have it drop right out the DOSBox, compile and come back. I just haven't done that on my main system because I have 3 or 4 different hard drives running at the same time, and it keeps complaining about permission. So I just said, I'm not bothering. It's quick enough for me to have a window open and do it.
Sure. So I like the way Turmoil looks. I'm excited. It looks like a classic.
Here's the box too.
Very nice. I'm excited to plug it in when I get it. I like the way it looks. I like the way it plays. It plays very true to what the traditional Aquarius / Intellivision games. It looks like it could be an Intellivision game for that matter. So kudos to you on that. I'm actually kind of excited about trying out Flappy Bird too.
Then there's other games coming into pipes too, as I think you may have seen on the store there. There's one I'm working on right now. I will have to, I believe, I don't know if I need to speak to you or Jay about the expanded ROMs with more than 16K available, being able to page in bank switching, because I am working on a game right now that is going to port over to other ones. But it's basically, I mean, we've all played Zork. Well, it's Zork. A brand new type, not Zork itself, but the same concept, a very large
text-based
world. Yeah, very large text-based world game. And I'd like to run it on the Aquarius too, because there's no reason why I can't. I just need to have a lot of ROM. Yeah. I mean, right now I'm targeting a 512K ROM for this world that I'm creating.
Yeah, Jay definitely knows how to do that. He bank switches in for his Aquarius cart, both the documentation and the ROM files that he's got. So.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to put this over on the Aquarius too.
It's pretty simple. The basic paradigm is that in each page, you maintain the page flipping routine at a known location, and then you keep, say, graphics in one page, and then depending on how you split up the banks. But yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Pretty easy to do, especially if you can, especially on the Aquarius, where you can take control over that top 16K. Use it as a replacement for your system ROM, and then unfortunately we don't have the ability to switch out that lower 16K to usable space. But yeah, Jay's definitely your guy for that.
Yeah, what I'm doing with the ColecoVision is we got 32K ROM in the top 32K, and I'm able to page out the last 16K. So the first 16K is the engine, and then the other 16K is the data, depending on where I'm at in the world. Yep. And as long as I can do something similar to like that, I can run it on any system. I just got
you absolutely can. Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you very much. And again, when are you gonna be at the various shows?
I'll be at Corgs, which is the Columbus, Ohio Retro Game Show on May 14th. I'm going to be at Cleveland Classic Arcade Games or something like that. That's July 13th or something like that. I have on my website.
Yeah, I think Ben Heck's going to be on that one too.
Oh, really? That'd be nice. And then I'll be at Pittsburgh Retro Gaming Show November 4th or whatever the day is. And then I'll be at Torgs November 4th and 5th every week. And then Torgs, which is the Ohio Retro Gaming show in Columbus, November 11th or November 14th, something like that. There's 4 different ones. There seems to be a really big retro gaming community in Ohio that I found. I'm on the border of it, and I've hardly found any here in Pennsylvania yet. So I'm having to go across the border for my retro gaming stuff.
For your fix, like in the old days.
So yeah, I'll be there, and we're going to. I know at Torgs and at Corgs, I'm going to set it up in my booth, but at Torgs, we're going to have a big classic computer section where computers are going to be set up behind glass running, and I'm going to have a Mattel running there, an Aquarius running there, along with an Atom and TS1000. So I'm going to have them running. Probably at Corgs in May, I will set up in my booth. I'll have the Aquarius running, and I'll have an Atom running also, or ColecoVision running software. So yeah, I mean, I got a really big response last October with the Atom, and I'm waiting to see what kind of response I get with the little Aquarius running.
Cool.
On a table all set up.
I'm sure you will bring smiles to at least 3 people's faces, including your.
Well, it was interesting. So many people come out of the woodwork and said, "Oh, I know that computer. I've seen that one." And everybody was like, "Oh, isn't that the one with the power supply and the printer?" So everybody's, what is the one thing that everybody knows the Aquarius for? So I'm ready for that one. Is there something that everybody always says, "Oh, isn't that the one that?"
Oh, I'll let Roy answer that because he's been in more situations like that. Roy, you and Mac actually got the chance to go to the a retro conference about 3 months ago. Is that right?
That's right. In fact, there's a new one end of May. I'll be back for what we're calling 82 Fest. So unfortunately, the Aquarius won't be showing there because she's an 83 machine. But yeah, so every year, so I actually volunteer at the Centre for Computing History in Cambridge, and every year we put on numerous exhibitions, but there's always a big one that we just call the Retro Fest, which lasts the entire weekend. And Mac very kindly managed to make it all the way from Jersey to Cambridge, slightly longer than the three odd hours it takes me to get there. But yeah, so we had, so I normally take quite a few rare machines. This year, I didn't take the Aquarius itself. Mac did that, but I did take my Aquarius too, because that's always that always gets a little bit of a crowd, because most people say didn't even know there was an Aquarius 2, and technically there never was. You know, but I'm lucky enough to have one and have repaired it so it's fully working. And I tend to show off the one and only game that's available for it because I wrote it. So it tends to run a version of Bombcatcher just for the Aquarius 2. But yeah, so Mac also did some incredible when he brought his Aquarius, and he had a 3D demo that he'd written to run on the Aquarius. Yes, 3D in quotes. So it was a pseudo isometric rotating cube with a scrolling message going along the bottom, just saying welcome to the retro show.
And a PG3 sound clip playing in the background.
And yeah, and he had some AY sound running as well. So I suppose that technically meant that the Aquarius has entered the demo scene. But yeah, when you come back to your original question about people that some of the most popular questions you get when you talk about the Aquarius, I think the first one is probably, is that not that really terrible machine that didn't do very well? And of course the answer to that is absolutely, because it was on sale for what, 4 months
at the most.
And even the engineers themselves taglined it the system of the 70s, didn't they? Even though it came out in 83. And the other one's normally, isn't that the one with the terrible blue keyboard? Well, yes and yes, but you know, terrible in my for my collections rules means awesome. So I do, as it says in my Twitter bio, I am the defender of the Mattel Aquarius. But it is, people do struggle with when you tell them the limitations of the machine, especially in the year that it came out. So a lot of people find it fascinating that there is still people like us doing stuff for a machine that was never popular anywhere. I mean, in the
fascinating
UK,
/ sad. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, in the UK and especially in Scotland, I mean, this machine was unheard of. I mean, the only reason I got one, this is a story that you know, Sean, but for the other guys here and the people on Facebook. So I mean, when I was 10, right, I really wanted that. The ZX Spectrum had just come out, right, and Sinclair in the UK were huge, and the Spectrum was an awesome machine when it came out. For only 125 quid, you could get a color machine that was fascinating. So we didn't have much money when I was growing up, so I begged mum and dad for a computer for Christmas, and I was quite honest with them and said, look, I know the ZX Spectrum's just come out, and I'd love a Spectrum, but I realize that they're really expensive, so I would settle for a ZX81, because we had a ZX81 at school, and that's the first time I'd ever seen a computer of any kind, was when they wheeled this thing in a trolley with a 14-inch black and white color TV sitting on top of it. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. So I said to mum and dad, you know, I'd settle for a ZX81. And so dad, being dad, went off to the local electronics store. And there isn't that many big electronics stores where I grew up. Where I grew up, the electronic stores tended to be the bank, the post office, the corner shop, the TV repair place, and the electronics store. And of course, my dad knew everybody who was there. Anyway, so he went in and he said that he was looking for a computer for his son, his eldest son. And have you got this thing called a ZX81? And of course, the salesman said, well, we do have Sinclair ZX81s for sale, as well as the new Spectrum. But your son, he really doesn't want a ZX81 because it's black and white for a start. It's got no sound, and it's got a mere 1 kilobyte of RAM, which meant nothing to Dad, by the way. 1 kilobyte of RAM. So Dad says, well, what would you recommend? And so and so this box got wheeled out, and it was the Aquarius. And of course, the salesman says to Dad, he says, well, this is actually on special. That's the one. Yeah, I would have got mine down. That's it. Yeah, I would have got mine down from there, but yours is more handy. So he says to my dad, he says, well, this is actually on special offer right now. They've just reduced the cost. Now, when you think about the sort of July to October timeframe, I was probably right smack bang in the middle of that when they were looking to get something. And of course, the salesman says, well, this machine, it's color for a start. It's got 4 times the amount of RAM memory, and it can play music and all sorts, you know, and it's cheaper than the black and white thing over there. So wouldn't that be a better deal? And of course, Dad did the right thing and bought the Aquarius, which then, you know, on Christmas morning, that's what was under the tree. And I mean, I fell in love with it instantly. I didn't care that nobody'd ever heard of it. I didn't care that every time I went to the library to get an Usborne book to copy all the, you know, the basic programs that were all listed in there, not a single one would run on the Aquarius. And that actually sparked something in me, because I spent a lot of time then converting those early programs from the ZX81 or from the BBC Micro in order to run on the humble Aquarius. And it helped spark my career in IT. You know, I wouldn't be in IT had it not been for the wee blue key. And you know, and even though I had numerous machines after that, I still had, there's still that tie to the Aquarius because it is so rubbish. It's so poor that you you know, and as Millie pointed out, there's you try and bring the best out of the machine within the capabilities that it has, but it pushes you to try and make it do more. And so you're always looking at how can I do that and how can I do this, because you don't have hardware sprites. You don't have scrolling. You don't have interrupts. My God,
or bitmaps or anything.
Yeah, you don't have anything. You don't have anything at all. So you have to rely on your wits. And I think the generation that we're from, really, we were quite used to some of the more simple games from those early days on those early machines. And I think we use that experience when we look fondly down at the Aquarius. And I am actually looking fondly down at my Aquarius. There she is there. And you think, well, how am I going to make it? How am I going to make it do that? How am I going to make her do this? And then when you find kindred spirits who are doing different things still, from the hardware point of view to the software point of view to, producing new cartridge games. I mean, that would have been unheard of just a few years ago, because it's only recently that the retro scene's taken off. And I think it's great that machines like the Aquarius have managed to catch the attention of people, because I think the groups, how many people are in the Facebook group now?
Quite a few. Yeah. And I mean, there's a Twitch group. Twitch, is that right? No, I always get them confused. The one with the purple gaming pad.
Oh, Discord.
Discord. There's a Discord group, and of course, the Atari Age forums has been around for a bit. It's for me. I know Jay Snellen prefers to use that group, and I get it. No, not everybody likes Facebook, but there is not one ring to rule them all. There is. We're kind of all over the place, and I've tried to do as much as possible when there's content like this, make sure that it's on YouTube. Obviously, Evie has gotten a good following with the stuff she does on her Evie's Review. So, Evie, did you want to run with what you got?
So let me just show you booting up here. So okay, I want to give you a little preface first. So my Backbit cartridge, which you can see, okay, this is what I call my Backbit Pro cartridge. I think you have the original.
Pro. That's not fair. I've got
the Legacy. So the main difference between my Pro products and my not Pro products, the original Backbit cartridge I made ran off of a Teensy 3.5, which is a Arduino API microcontroller. And that was like my first go in hardware, because most of my life, my whole career, I was doing pretty much just software. But in the last few years, I was looking for something new to do, something to connect me to the things that really inspire me, because I had this whole career in video games, and that went, some of the highlights of that were doing like ports of classic games onto mobile. So one of my favorite projects was I made a port of Gauntlet, actually the first port of Gauntlet onto a mobile phone. And this was, to date myself, back in like 2002 or 2003. And then of course EA came along later and bought out the license and made their own version, which was a bit better because, you know, in 2 years, the technology improved quite a bit. So I was working on basically some of the earliest cell phone games, basically. This was before iOS, before Android. And, you know, so it's real terrible limitations for the processing. Anyway, so yeah, that was a long tangent. But anyway, so let me just get up to speed here. So Backbit Pro cartridge, I grew out of using Arduino, and I have like a STM32 chip that goes right on the board. And of course, no one can get those chips right now because they're but I have a stack of them coming in about a month, so I'll be able to at least fulfill the orders that I have stacking up now. And then hopefully later on, I'll be able to actually make more of these things. Anyway, so this cartridge runs on 13, 14 systems now. And it runs on like, those systems have like maybe five different CPUs, like 6502, 8086, Z80. Yeah, okay. So let me just get to the Aquarius now. That's probably what you want to see. Okay, so here's the Aquarius. Turn it on. You see the Backbit screen. You see some games, and I can navigate with the joystick. So you can see it on there, but it's very, very dark to the naked eye here. So Burger Time. You see Burger Time. One player. Okay, so that's Burger Time. So you press the button, it goes back to the menu, and then I can play another game. So like Night Stalker. So, okay, the point I wanted to make, about the Backbit cartridge was to get this working on the Aquarius basically took one evening, and that might sound crazy, but the way that works, so I made the adapter, and that was maybe like a month ago, and then I send that to China, and then I get a few boards.
Do you use JLC PCB?
I do.
Yeah, same here.
I started out using, I guess the first place I used was like Osh Park, and
Expensive.
then I realized,
Expensive, and you gotta like purple.
Yeah. So the first place I used was Osh Park, and then I was using PCB Way for a while, and then someone clued me in for JLC, and I think their prices are a bit better than PCB Way. That's what I've been using since, but I'm not tied to them. I just use them because they're efficient, and they, you know, they're a good service for the level of throughput I have now.
Yep, I always look forward
to design them.
What's that?
Do you use KiCad to design them, or?
I do use KiCad. I taught myself KiCad. I think I started out, there was what's that guy with the little bow tie who does the DigiKey videos?
I'll have to watch that.
Yeah, I don't remember his name.
So it's on DigiKey, and it's like learning KiCad?
Yeah, here. KiCad, DigiKey. There's this guy, okay, I have to figure out what his name is. Sean. I don't know what his other name is, but anyway, there's this guy named Sean who does these videos for DigiKey, and I watched a few of the videos. I'm like, oh, this isn't too hard. So
cool.
And then I had to teach myself routing. And so basically the thing I taught myself, because I love to play logic games, and you know, routing in KiCad is kind of like a game for me. So it's actually kind of,
it's like the old Activision game Pipe Dream.
I'm sure there are programs to just do it automatically for you. I mean, if you got more.
Yeah, it's funny because a project that I'm working on, they want to use KiCad. I'm super proficient in Eagle, but I'm also trying to learn KiCad. And this a couple people on the team hate auto routing. For me, it gets me into the ballpark, and then I can drag stuff where I need to. But yeah, it's going to be interesting.
But the trick that I taught myself, and I'm sure someone else has figured this out too, is that if you always use you know, red or green, use one of the colors for horizontal and one color for vertical, and that will help you to actually arrange your wires in a way. And then if you're doing a really tight design, then I kind of go through iterations. Like I do the horizontal and vertical, and if things don't fit, things start getting a little more diagonal.
And then you just jump up to a 4-level board, or do you try to keep them at 2 levels?
I haven't done 4. I was just about to do a 4-level board for my Chip Tester Pro, but the funny thing is, once I did the 4-layer board, all of a sudden I realized I could do a 2-layer board.
Right.
So like the exercise of doing the 4-layer and saving power and ground till the end actually made me realize I could fit it. And I've got these like 5 mil traces. I think that's the minimum JLC does. Yeah, it's a pretty insane fit on the Chip Tester. Yeah. So anyway, the reason that this only takes me one evening to do is because I've already done Z80 machines. Let me take a just look at a list of machines here. Actually, I haven't. Oh, I don't have my information super organized here, but there are a lot of Z80 machines. There's like the MSX, Spectrum is a Z80 machine. Was the Amstrad Z80? I think so. And yeah, so there's a lot of Z80 machines. And so basically a lot of my infrastructure runs from the cartridge. And so that can be the same on all the machines. And then there's just like one piece of code to do this really lightweight browser that you see here. And basically, you can move around, you can navigate directories. And then I got these special functions. So if I press Control-1, so here's the utilities menu. And then Control-2 is the properties menu. Control-3 is the saves. And Control-4 is the tools. And tools is for when you're doing actions on a specific program. But all those menus are running from the cartridge, and the program on the machine just gets a screen of data, and then the only thing the cartridge really does on the fly is like basically navigate up and down. That's the only thing it really does without having to talk to the cartridge. So you get one screen at a time, and that way at least you don't have to, there's not going to be a lag for every time you press a button.
So if a user wants to use the Backbit, they need to get the ROM images. Again, there's really, other than Disney with Tron and probably Hasbro with Advanced D&D, the ROM versions are pretty easy to find out there. Most people have them in their collection. They're copying it to an mini SD card. Is that correct?
Yeah, micro SD.
Very cool, micro SD. And then does it, if a person loads, say the ROM file from Extended Basic, then they have the ability to run as though they've got the Extended Basic cartridge running.
Yeah, so let me do that here. So take this menu here. Okay, so I can just press the E key, Extended Basic, enter. So you see Extended Basic now, and if I say print free, it was really bizarre to me that you have to do, that's a 3-letter free. I tried all the combinations, like that's the only thing that works. So that means, can you read that at all?
No.
So it says -31116, which means it's got 32K RAM expansion built in.
Cool.
Now, okay, so I have this chart.
Does it only support ROM files? Sorry, are you not going to? Will it support Caq or WAVs?
Okay. So that's what I'm getting to right now. So if you go to backbit.io/downloads/docs and click on, I mean, I could put a link in the chat here. Okay, so if you go here, you see my whole documentation. And if you go to page 2, I have a chart there.
Got it.
Okay, so there's this chart, and the green boxes are the happy boxes. So level 1 is mounting cartridges. So when I get a new machine, first I make the adapter, and then I try to load a cartridge. Like in this case, I put Night Stalker on there. So the very first game on any Backbit cartridge ever was Moondust. Does anyone remember that game for the Commodore?
Vaguely, yeah.
It had really interesting like movement dynamics, because you have these little, if you look at Moondust, there's these little like these little things that just like spaceships and this little guy, and they're just twirling around. and then it's got this like computer generated music sequences. Anyway, the guy who wrote that, his name is Jerome Lanier, and he has written a lot of books, and he got really big into AI. I even saw him on Stephen Colbert once because he plays these weird musical instruments.
Like the theremin.
Just all kinds of weird stuff. Anyway,
That's a
so
good tune.
yeah,
Yeah,
look him up on
please.
YouTube. He's got a lot of interesting ideas. Anyway, so just the day I first got that game on the screen, it's like, oh, wow, because it's a lot of work to set up, you know, this communication, streaming the data from the cartridge to the computer, and it's like most of the work for getting that going is like, okay, I see nothing, and then it was, you know, I mean, I probably worked on that originally for like a month, just can I get anything on the screen, and then one day it's like, boom, the game's just on the screen. It's like, you know, because it really is like all or nothing when you're trying to communicate with these old machines. So the first step is just getting a game running, and then after that, I have to if my browser isn't already set up to run that processor, I have to translate the code. So I've got code for all these different processors, and like TMS 9900, that's a really obscure one, like for the TI-99. And it's interesting because, you know, these assembly languages, like some make certain operations easy, like 6502, just to copy a large chunk of memory, like a few K, takes a lot of instructions. Whereas like Z80, it's pretty straightforward, and 8086 is even easier. There's so many nuances, and like some processors, the load instruction will set the flags, and other processors, the load instruction won't set the flags. Anyway, so in this case, I already had Z80 code. So then what I have to do for this specific machine, I have to get key handling for this machine, joystick handling for this machine. I had to do the memory expansion, and then, like, you know, loading the cartridge into the right place in memory, and then being able to communicate with the graphics. And every system has a different way of interfacing with graphics. This system was actually surprisingly easy to interface with on a graphical level. It's pretty much as easy as like the Commodore 64, because you write to memory and everything's arranged in a single block, not like the ZX Spectrum where you have like 3 zones of the screen. So all these pieces I add to the browser, and then it has to communicate 2 ways with the cartridge. So Z80 actually makes that really easy, because Z80 has IO just built in to the processor. So you have the in and out instructions. And IO is just really actually quite reliable on the Z80, whereas other machines, there's no IO at all. There's only ROM access. So you have to, so a write actually is a read. You have to do, you do a read instead of a write. And then the last 8 bits of the address are actually the data that you're writing. So that's a neat trick to use. And then some machines don't have a reset. The Aquarius has a reset, but it seems like if the machine crashes, it doesn't reset, which is also a quirk on like Ataris. And some machines don't have a reset at all, like Atari doesn't have a reset, Amstrad CPC Plus doesn't have a reset, and ColecoVision doesn't have a reset. So I actually have this bodge wire that you can use a solderless jumper. If you open up the machine, you can install that. So that's the extent of like actual hardware modifications that are required to use Backbit, or basically just that reset pin. Yes. And those pins have varying quality.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, some of them just clip right on, and some are really difficult. And I even found some more expensive ones that will even clip to like surface mount pins.
Wow.
But you can also get like alligator clips if your joints are that you're hooking up to are bigger. Anyway.
So what does it take to get to level 2 on the Backbit? I see
so
Aquarius
we're
is
getting there.
planned.
So once I get the browser up and running, and then I can load programs, and then I have to make sure that the machine resets properly. Aquarius had a weird thing with the checking, like the copy protection. Certainly not, like, probably the worst machine for copy protection that I've dealt with is the Amstrad CPC Plus, and it's funny how it seems like this copy protection seems to really backfire on these systems.
Yeah.
You know, because like what have they saved from doing copy protection? Like the systems that have really flourished are the ones that have had a lot of game developers and, you know, a lot of users, and that brings me to the story of like the Apple II, because Apple II started out as a real homebrew machine, and then, as we know, evolved into the evil Macintosh. But so the start of Apple II is this totally homebrew thing, and then by the time they got to the 2C, the architecture started getting really, really, really closed, and trying to recreate their disk controller for the 2C. It's an absolute nightmare because there's so much hidden stuff going on in there. Anyway,
so, yeah, like so it looks like for the 2, it's actually easier to do full disk support, but you can't mount cartridges.
Well, okay,
yeah.
So yeah, Apple, I started out doing full disk support, but I realized I actually, because I like to have the small machines, because like I stack up these machines here, and my goal when I bought most of these systems was to just get the smallest form factor, because I don't have a ton of room here.
Well, the Aquarius has that in spades. It's pretty tiny.
So I figured I'd go with the Apple IIc because it's small, but I'm actually, just based on my frustration with the disk controller chip, I realized, wait a minute, actually, I'm going to go back to the Apple IIe. I'm going to get a 2E one of these days, and I'll just make a card for it. Because the irony is, I wanted something you could just plug in externally to the machine, but in Apple II, the slots are really just cartridge slots. It's just that they're internal.
Yeah.
But they're basically like electrically the same thing as a cartridge slot, and there's 8 of them. So yeah, so that's why I started with full disk support on the Apple II. But also Apple II never had like cartridges. It's pretty much just a disk-based computer from the get-go. I mean, I guess there was a cassette era briefly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so as far as this list here, okay, so you see most things tick the first box, mounts cartridges. The difference between cartridges and programs, cartridges, I just stick an image in ROM and the machine recognizes it and it just runs. Programs are a little different because it has to integrate with the operating system somehow, whether that's usually basic. So for loading programs, usually I have a little stub that boots up like a cartridge and then communicates with the Backbit and loads the program into RAM and then hooks in and runs the program. And that's pretty straightforward. So like the cassette games, oh, we lost someone.
William, yeah.
So I see there's the, what is it, Caq files?
Yeah, the Caq files.
And a lot of them come in pairs. So it looks like there's like a little loader that has an array, and then it loads the machine code into that array and calls it. And I guess that's because there's no way to load something directly as machine code.
There is not. The micro expander that Bruce Abbott has, it's got its own wedge that opens up the CH376 interface that he has.
The CH370.
It's a USB header card, so you can use it. It's common on the Arduino. That's right. It's a pretty common thing, and he supports that, and that's how he loads items in. Typically, Caq Files will start at, there's a base address.
3901.
Yeah, exactly. If you load from there, it just assumes it's loading from that point back. And what's good about that is that covers the pointer where the user routine is.
My biggest question for that, so I can obviously just skip the loader and load it right into the place in memory I want to load it. But then, are the programs relocatable?
I don't.
Does the program expect that it's going to be loaded at this exact address, or are all the jumps relative?
They're all relative, as far as I know. I'm not the best person to ask.
I'm not the best person either, but as far as I'm aware,
I mean, it's just because looking at the loader, it loads into an array, and I mean, of course, they could calculate and be pretty sure where it's going to load in memory. But the fact that they're just loading machine code into array makes me think that the whole thing is just relocatable.
Probably is. Like I said, Bruce Abbott's allows you to do, what he's done is he's taken advantage of the extended basic 4K hole that is right above the 8K ROM.
Yeah.
And he's created a USB basic, and he's got both a load and a run command that will put it in and then execute it.
So I'm guessing that if the cartridge responds to memory requests in that whole area, it's as if you had ROM there.
I assume so.
Yeah, it's interesting. Z80, there's like the whole Z.
That's
the whole Z80 architecture. It's actually just makes most of the communication just really straightforward. Like the irony is, I started on Commodore, and Commodore is by far like the dirtiest bus of all of these systems, because there's so many things competing for the bus, and you have these little slight windows where things can go through and actually work.
Yeah, the main problem with memory, particularly as it works with the expansion bus on the Aquarius, is that the data doesn't have a direct line off of the expansion bus into the Z80. It's actually buffered by one of the PLAs. So that's why on the schematic you'll see that there's D0 through 7, and then there's either ED 0 through 7 or XD 0 through 7 that's on the expansion bus. And that's that whole security thing where it has to store it.
That makes sense. Most of the Z80 systems that I've used do have some kind of buffer. So if you ever want to like hack the bus, you just can't, because it's buffered. It's like
unless you get a lot of jumper wires.
Like for example, the TI-99 and the Atom, I was thinking, oh, can I just have like, do I have to have a sidecar and a cartridge? Can't I just have one device in one place? And you really can't, because the way, and it's funny because you look at the buses and it's not that. So it made me realize that a 245 transceiver not only prevents the flow of data, but it also forces the flow of data. And that was like an aha moment for me, because not only is it preventing data from going here to here, but it's forcing the bus to always have data on it. So you can't override it even if you wanted to. And so when I was trying to set up a TI-99 sidecar, I realized, well, you can't get to the cartridge memory. It's just totally blocked off. And same thing, if you have a cartridge, you can't get to the RAM expansion. It's totally blocked off.
Well, if you want to take on reworking the PLAs in a new environment, we'd love to have replacement PLAs, because those are the two bespoke chips. Yeah.
I'm actually, well, so a PLA replacement opens up a lot of things. So I did a little bit of work in in-circuit testing on the Commodore, and it's funny because it's like almost no one wants to go there. So I managed to do in-circuit testing on every chip on the Commodore 64. But that was with the original chip tester, which had pretty much no current limiting. So out of what I learned over the course of time, so the Chip Tester Pro has current limiting on every pin. The CPUs already have pretty good over voltage protection, but I also put Zener diodes on every pin just to be on the safe side. So the problem is once you put current limiting, then in-circuit testing takes a little more strategy, because instead of just forcing the signals through, you have to be a little more strategic. So for the PLA on the Commodore, I have a replacement, I call it Private Eyes, where it'll just hold all the chip select, it'll pull all the chip selects high so that all the chips default to not being on the bus. And then it makes it more, so to do in-circuit chip testing with the Chip Tester Pro, you have to have a PLA replacement, because otherwise it's just, there's no way to override all those signals with a small amount of current. So I did a PLA replacement for the Commodore 128. I haven't had anyone bug me about doing in-circuit testing for that. I mean, the irony is in-circuit testing, it's a neat concept. And if you have a machine that you're really trying to preserve, or you just don't like desoldering, then that's an option. But I don't know. I mean, it seemed like not having to desolder chips was an advantage. It seemed like it was an advantage with in-circuit testing, but I think my view now is just in-circuit testing it's more like a challenge thing. It's like, see if you can do it. It's not necessarily going to save you a lot of time, because it comes with its own challenges, but it's just, the fact that you can do it is an interesting challenge, I think.
So what's your time frame for, I know you're suffering the same problems most of us are. I can't get CPLDs or Xilinx to save my life, or even simple stuff like on the Aquarius, we replaced the 7805s with the Omron switched power supply.
Yeah, those are really interesting little.
They're gone. They're like $20 on eBay if you want to pay that much for them.
Yeah.
So what do you, in a perfect world, what would your time frame be for Aquarius related items? Because you obviously have two components. You have the Backbit, which people would buy, and then the for the Aquarius.
So I have a handful of these Atmel CPLDs that I use for the Plaster and the Genesister. And then for the Plaster 128, I use the Xilinx like 72 pin.
And those are more available.
I think you can get the like pricier ones right now for like $9 a piece or something, but I mean, my biggest focus right now is really like, I would say is Backbit Pro. That's like my biggest focus. And the thing for me that's kind of my driving force is it's like having this one interface that works with everything lets me really get to know different paradigms for how all these systems are architectured. That's been like the most interesting thing for me, because growing up, it's like, okay, I use the Sinclair, I use the Commodore, and then I guess I used Apple II for a little while, and then I got to PCs, and in my teenage phase, I really, really hated Macs. Macs were just the most awful thing that no one should use.
Wholeheartedly agree.
But then I got into the corporate world, and I kind of got into MacBooks for a while, just because it was kind of a lazy thing. It was kind of like, let me see just how little I can how much, let me see how much I can do with as little attention and focus as possible. That was the fun for me with MacBooks. And then I ended up getting back into PCs just because I was no longer mobile. Like, I spent a year in New York, and I just, I just wanted to explore, and I wasn't locked down at all. And now I'm here back in California, and I just realized, I want to get back into my roots and just, make things happen. And, wasn't as worried about being fashionable.
So Millie's on the chat within
Oh, yeah?
Facebook. He wants to know, does the Backbit Pro support the Coleco Vision Mega Cart?
That's a good question. I would have to check and get back to you.
Yeah, he said he can supply the specs if you ever.
Yeah, that kind of
there's enough of an ask for it.
That kind of thing can always be added. So I have a megabyte of SRAM that can be totally devoted to the cartridge, that can be served instantly. And beyond that, obviously, it can serve the whole content of an SD card. But there's some delays, and it's like each system I have to use a different strategy for how to potentially delay the system. Z80 makes it really easy because you have the bus request and bus acknowledge. So anytime you want to hold down the system, you just do a bus request, and the system is just totally paused, and then then I can do whatever processing I need to do, and then I can come back.
Cool.
Obviously, the system's going to be not doing anything during that time, but at least, yeah. Anyway, so
cool.
Yeah, but yeah. So I do support various banking schemes, and any banking scheme is probably not that difficult to implement as long as it's below the 1 megabyte barrier.
Yeah, one of the strategies that that I was coming up with, because I was trying to develop. See, I've got the card here. I was trying to use a CPLD that allowed 64 banks of 16 for each of the 16K registers. The 2 of 4, the 3 of 4, and the 4 of 4. But I did have to make sure that the CPLD, if it saw a cartridge on the bus, that it wouldn't activate the high RAM, as I call it. But I didn't have a chance to go any further with that, so I'm excited about it.
I've actually been enjoying taking the approach of just hogging the whole machine. I know a lot of people on Commodore like to use those, expander devices. But for me, the paradigm with Backbit is just plug and play. You want to play a game, you put on the SD card, you put it in the computer and go. So in that sense, like the philosophy behind Backbit, it is in a way kind of simplifying things. Whereas, obviously there's a, if you like tinkering, you might want to have like 5 cartridges at the same time. But the Backbit concept is just, load stuff on there and play it. I do, some support of, getting deeper into the weeds. But I try to steer away from that a little bit, just because when I get too machine specific, then it makes more difficult for my infrastructure to run on all these devices.
Sure. Do you ever see yourself, if and when we'll assume when you get to the level 2 support for the Aquarius,
yeah,
does the Backbit itself offer like what an ice pick cartridge does, where it can dump memory and then
like
reload it? Yeah, like a freezer.
So I do have a freezer for the Commodore 64. It takes an annoying amount of like custom infrastructure to make that happen. And then you got to do like, I don't recall if I've exposed the non-maskable interrupt line. I think it probably is connected on most of my adapters. You know, if someone really pushes me, I'll work on stuff like that. But as you can see with my chart, my main focus is taking in as many boxes as possible on this chart. That's kind of my main focus. I know a lot of people right now are using the RAM expanders on the Commodore. And when I was bored a while back, I tried to mess with DMA, and it's probably something that I could mess with, but it's just, it's not my favorite thing to work on because it's more of a signal problem and less of a code architecture. Like, I think I actually more enjoy things I can conquer with my code architecture rather than sitting there with the scope. It's like, how can I make this do what it's supposed to do based on all these constraints? And that's why I kind of gave up on working on the, well, I didn't give up. I haven't given up completely on that type of stuff. It's just not my biggest strength right now. And so rather than, you know, spending days just beating my head against the wall, I'd rather just do things that I can, you know, have more of that instant gratification on. Like, you know, I spent an evening and now my cartridge works with Aquarius, and that feels good. You know, and that's based on the architecture I've set up. You know, if I had to make a backbit from scratch for the Aquarius, it would probably take me a month like it did for the Commodore. But because I have lots of infrastructure, you know, I can just hook into my existing infrastructure on most things.
Cool. I very much look forward to.
But back to your question. I know I never got to your question. So I am planning to do the cassette support for the Aquarius. That's the next step. And then beyond that, the question, I guess it's the question of like, what do people want? Because I don't know that the disk system was that popular on the, I mean, the whole system was not that popular, but the question is like, what makes sense, like just from a constraint of, you know, I don't want to have to implement like a whole API that has, you know, 50 functions.
Right.
So like for the PC Junior, it was amazing to support floppy disks. There's a read sector and a write sector. And just with that, you can support, you know, just a lot of floppy disk games.
Well, the Aquarius itself basically is assuming, if you're talking about the core load, cassette load and cassette save, you're assuming that you're coming from a streaming function and it's going from one point in memory to whenever it's done. Like I mentioned before, on the micro expander, you have a little more flexibility with that. You don't necessarily need to have a basic kicker to get it there. But it's basically, you can assume that nobody ever had a disk drive for the Aquarius because
I saw some documentation about the IO ports that say these ports are reserved for floppy drives.
Correct, yeah, and as far as we know, they were never used. So again, unless Bruce used those same IO addresses for where he mapped the USB interface, but
yes. So it's funny because one of the biggest challenges of doing Backbit is just that just to try to wrap your brain around, like, how do I even start on doing this? Like I did a disk controller for Tandy, and it's just like where do you even begin? It's like you have to like you know, it's like what data has to get from where to where. And so for Tandy, you plug in this thing to the side of the machine, and that's your disk controller. And then I guess there's just, my brain can't even go there. So where was it? Okay, so as far as, so if we were gonna set up like a level 3 for the Aquarius, how would that work? So it would be some kind of loading and saving. And somehow that has to get to the cartridge. So there has to be some code on the machine that talks to the cartridge. And one of the easiest ways to do that is like to add some kind of ROM hook. And obviously, because you can load extended basic, you could just hack extended basic and add some kind of hook in there. So I know you have the C load command.
Mhm.
Is there also a C save?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
There
so
is, yeah.
And
So-
then in the USB basic, they also have just save and load
Yeah,
as well
and
too.
run.
Yeah, and run as well.
Yeah, because there's
I got-
no auto run function on the tape on the standard Aquarius. If you're loading from tape from streamed data, there's no auto run feature.
mm,
So you have to run it yourself.
So that's why you see
however-
those two Caq files typically. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, like Commodore 64, that was the first one I did, and I did full like just full disk emulation. So that's basically there's characters sent over a serial device, except in that case they're sent directly to the cartridge or using the kernel. Anyway, I'm getting into the weeds here.
Okay.
But there's a whole infrastructure like internally on the cartridge for Commodore where you can have 8 devices, and it has to understand all these different commands that are sent to it, and that like there's so much to do there. Whereas like with the PC Junior, it's like read sector, write sector, and DOS handles everything else, and that makes things so much easier. So kind of where, like, you know, when I just had one system, you know, I could devote a ton of time to making this custom infrastructure for that one machine. But my focus now is like, you know, just have a few, you know, just have the minimal amount of hooks, you know, to be able to do what you want to do. And then from there, you could expand on that potentially with software.
Cool. So are you heading to any interesting swap meets or retro fairs, or is that
actually tomorrow I'm doing a thing called the Trans Tech Summit.
where is that? Is it virtual?
It's virtual. I believe it's transtechsocial.com. This is the link here.
Cool. I'll post that into.
So it's the first time that I've done this event. I heard about it a few years ago and just never, it wasn't virtual and I would have had to travel. And actually before the pandemic, I was kind of planning to do a bunch of things. So I was gonna go up to the Vintage Computer Festival in Pacific Northwest, and then that got canceled. And so I did like a little virtual video for that. Yeah, I mean, I do like I do like the idea of doing events. It just yeah, hasn't been happening.
Yeah, it's logistics. I get it.
Well,
that was one of the things that Milli was talking about. He's going to be doing 3 or 4 over the next 9 months, and fortunately, he says that for some reason his area, particularly Ohio, has a lot of those. But well, either way, we will be happy to see any new Evie's review videos.
Yeah, I think if I'm gonna do some events, I think it's gonna. Originally, it was like, okay, I have to bring my Commodore, but I think if I'm gonna do events going forward, I think it's more of, okay, I'll bring my cartridge and all my adapters and see what the event is gonna let me plug my cartridge in their machine.
That's a cunning plan, because normally when I go to shows, I end up taking my wife's car and fill it with a brim. So I mean, this year for 82 Fest, I think I'm down to take 19 machines or something ridiculous, I think. So that's probably going to be about 3 tables worth of machines, and I will spend the entire day telling people the same facts about the same machines, and they'll all swamp around the ones that they've never seen before.
Well, knowing you, you'll do it with a smile. So,
Of course, absolutely.
yes.
I love it. Absolutely love it.
I think with the chip shortage, I've really shifted more into focus on development, just because, I mean, the cartridges are, I mean, that, customers are trickling in, but it's not like there's really no incentive for me to, increase the size of my queue, because it's
Right.
like, as it is right now, when I get my chips, I'm gonna have to build like 100 things all at once. So there's not really an incentive to increase that queue. But obviously, because I support all these variety of systems, there is the hope that I'll create some synergy among these kind of disparate communities.
Mhm.
It's like you have, your Atari people, you have your Commodore people, and there's some overlaps, and Apple seems to be like a totally different world. And I mean, it's like opposite ends of the spectrum, because Commodore is this old machine that, Commodore and then Amiga, it's its own cult.
Yeah.
And, like, I don't know, there's something enjoyable about having this Commodore 64. It's just, something you can always come back to. It's so like, it's so hackable. And then Apple II is this totally different paradigm, because, you have this expandable system, and you have the homebrew clubs, and I mean, it's kind of just different worlds.
Yeah.
Then you have the poor little Aquarius out there on a limb, looking at all these other machines.
Yeah,
with
we're
a
not
tear in
cool.
its eye.
We're not cool
Well,
enough to have a cult.
I mean, well, Aquarius is part of the whole Z80 thing. That's a whole paradigm, the whole Z80.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I could say a good half of the machines that I worked on are Z80 machines. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I would probably think that most of my collection are all Z80s as well. Fair number of 6502s, but probably more Z80s. I do have, I mean, there are some obscure ones. I'm thinking of, so my Comex 35, for example, or the Cosmic Elf, which I'm looking at.
what 35?
A Comex 35.
Comex.
Yeah, but you've never heard of that. So that uses an RCA 1802 CPU.
Okay, I've never heard of that.
There you go. It's the same processor that's in a machine called the Caq Elf as well, which was a single board machine you could build from the 70s, which I do have over there. But the Comex is quite nice. The Comex 35 is a lovely little machine, but has bugger all software for it because nobody supports the 1802 CPU. And I love oddballs like that.
Yeah, converting my browser from one CPU to another, it's something I can do in about a day. It's not a ton of work.
Cool.
Like the things that are the biggest time sink for me are, one, trying to do a controller type thing, like trying to emulate a lot of signals all at once.
Yep.
That's one of the hardest things for me. And then the other hardest thing is trying to implement a whole big API, like open file, close file, format drive, what else is there in it? I mean, just like having to implement 100 functions with all very specific requirements. I tend to like to go with the things that are the most bang for the buck. Just here's a function to read, here's a function to write, and leave everything else up to someone else's code.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And so for those who are watching, please visit Evie's review, REVUE, not REVIWE. She's got some great stuff, and I've been a fan and a purchaser of products for a while now. I appreciate everything that you do.
Which reminds me, I have to send you a Pro cartridge. Do you want to wait for the gold adapter, because it's a pretty tight fit on this machine. It's what a chamfered edge.
I'm in no hurry. I've got plenty of Aquarius.
Probably in the next week or two, I'll do a run of those Goldfinger adapters for the Aquarius.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm actually, I mean, I know I brag about it, but I'm actually kind of amazed at what I accomplished in one night of just hooking this down.
Yeah, cool. So, Mr. Templeman, you want to tell us a little bit about, for those who haven't heard, you want to tell us a little bit about the history of the games and then where you're headed with your new project?
Yeah, I can. So I'm trying to remember when I brought out a query one. Now, was it 2020 or 2019? Can't remember. Let's say 2019. So I decided that there had been quite a long gap between what was deemed a new game for the Aquarius, which would have been back in the 80s, a new cassette game back in the 80s, to where we were at the beginning of the pandemic. And so I decided that I would write a version of Snake for the Aquarius. In fact, let me just grab the boxes. There we go. I'm sure most people have these, but I'll grab them anyway. Yeah, so I decided that because everybody was working from home, we had a bit more free time in the evening and things. I thought I'm going to write a computer game. And although my original idea was for it just to be a digital download, that people could just download the Caq file or the WAV file, and you would play a version of Snake. And when I started showing it off in the Facebook group, Simon from Chronosoft got in contact with me and asked if I would consider publishing the game through his non-profit organization, Chronosoft. And my initial reaction was, well, who's going to want to buy a computer game for a 40-year-old machine that lasted 4 months out in the wild and is basically terrible? And so we came up with this. I don't have to try and get rid of the glare, but quite a lot of people have actually bought the game, which is lovely. A query worm, yeah. So excuse my accent, the way I'm trying to get rid of the glare. And it's basically it's a version of Snake with a little play on how hard it is to play. So it's quite a simple game, but it was the first cassette game to come out for the Aquarius in about 35 years. So it was a bit of a milestone, and I quite enjoyed it.
So you're the first homebrew?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And because it was such a success, I thought.
How long ago was that?
I think it was 2019 when this came out. I'll have to check when it was, but I think it was 2019 because in 2020 I followed up with a second game called Bombcatcher 2. The reason it's called Yay, thank you. The reason it's called Bombcatcher 2 is because I actually wrote a 10-liner version called Bombcatcher for a competition. And so that did actually quite well, and I thought I could probably expand it into more of a game.
Is that the 4K binary?
Well, it has all 3 versions on the one tape. The 4K one is not the 1K. The 4K one's not the 10-liner. No, the 10-liner was even smaller. The 10-liner, you could probably grab it from my itch.io account. But it was literally just because the Aquarius, as you may well know. Hey, thank you very much. Look at that. Lovely, thank you. And so this was again a bit of a first in that it had all 3 versions on the one cassette. So there's a version for your non-expanded 4K Aquarius. There's an 8K version on here for people who have the 4K RAM expansion, and there's a 16K version for the people with the 16K of RAM. The differences is just slightly more elaborate gameplay, better front-end visuals, etc., etc.
Have you thought about doing a 32K RAM version?
Well, I'll come on to that. Yeah. There's a couple of variations of this as well. So the first variation I did, which isn't on cassette. So I did a special ROM version of this, which you can get from my itch.io account. And the ROM version supports the joypads and the AY sound chip, so it's a little bit more advanced. But I didn't release that as a cassette. It's just something you can download and play if you have the if you have the micro expander or an emulator. And the other variation I did of this was for the Aquarius 2. So I did a version of Bombcatcher called Bombcatcher A2 for the Aquarius 2, and it just takes advantage. It just takes uses some of the advantages you get with the Aquarius 2, and it's also the only game that's ever been written for the Aquarius 2, which I'm quite proud of. And then just recently, so where are we now? So that was so this might have been 2020 actually, a query worm 2020, because then 2021 Bombcatcher, and then this year I've just released Doomsday Defender. So Doomsday Defender is available right now through Chronosoft, and this cassette game, I may have been I may have reflected a certain sci-fi type film, as we would call them, but movie as you guys would call them. So it's not supposed to be affiliated with Independence Day, but you are trying to escape a very large mothership which has plopped itself above your city. It's releasing fighters. You need to shoot them to survive, and your city burns if you're not successful. It's quite good fun to play. It's a little bit sluggish here and there, depending on what the Aquarius is drawing on the screen. Can't really help that, although I'll probably get cues from you guys that are better coders than I am for what we do with what I do for my next release.
Roy, if you were to describe the gameplay of Doomsday Defender, seems to me, based on the screenshots that I've seen, seems like a cross between Astro Smash and maybe Missile Command.
Yep, that's probably fair. I mean, I'd probably add a little bit of Space Invaders in there as well, because they are actually shooting your city, which are a bit like the shields you would hide under in Space Invaders. And so the premise behind it is don't get shot, don't crash into the baddies, and try and stop your city burning to the ground. It's only really got 2 levels of play. It's got normal and hard, although the people that have bought it have said it's actually got hard and damn near impossible, which I apologize for, but I do like to make my games quite tough. Also, so there's 2 fields of play. There's the cityscape, which is a sort of normal difficulty level, and then there's the White House, which is a harder level. Now, the White House graphics were designed by Heidi Taylor. So I don't know if you remember Heidi from the Rock, Paper, Scissors game she did a wee while ago. And she's also been helping me with my latest release, which I'll come on to in a minute. But the White House,
yeah, I'd love to have her come on.
Yeah, I will.
She's been very elusive. Yeah,
she has. But I don't think you can see it on this. You can just about. So the White House is actually on the cassette there as a screenshot. But if you look at my HIO, you'll get all the screenshots. And I do recommend Doomsday Defender. It's an excellent game. Yeah, so she did the White House for me, which was very nice. My original design was just a bit rubbish. I knew I wanted a White House, but who better than an American to do it? I mean, what could I do? I'd come up with something that looked like, the Wallace Monument or something.
Or Buckingham Palace.
Well, that's in England.
Well, but you want to blow it up. The Wallace House.
Let's say Edinburgh Castle, and I'll be happy with that. Yeah. So I mean, it's over the last 3 years, I've managed to produce 3 computer games, which I never thought was in me, to be honest, especially not doing them all for the Aquarius. Although I love the Aquarius, I always thought that I'd maybe probably write something for maybe more of a mainstream machine, but the community and everybody who loves the Aquarius is such a great bunch of people, and the machine itself is it doesn't get a lot of love, so I'm kind of doing my bit, and then recently, over the last few months or so, I've been looking at creating a version of Star Trek. So the original sort of 70s text game that came out for the original, I think it was an HP mainframe, or was it the Sigma machine? Might have been Sigma, and then the HP mainframes, HP 2000.
That was the first game I hacked on the school's computers.
Fantastic. There you go. But believe it or not, the Aquarius never got a version of Star Trek. Now, I thought every machine in the known universe got a version of Star Trek, but that's not the case. And so, again, I got some good news with that, actually. So the game itself is almost finished. I've got a couple of bugs I'm trying to iron out. It's a turn-based game. I've tried to. It's not a direct port of the original because I'm trying to take advantage of the Aquarius's enhanced features. So although it's still character-based, you know, it means that you look like a little enterprise, and I've made the Klingons look like little birds of prey. And the stars look like stars, you know, and it has sound, so it will shoot phasers and you'll hear them. It'll shoot photon torpedoes and you'll hear them. But the one of the best pieces of news, and I got to take my hat off to Heidi for this one because she did the legwork here, is the design of what's going to be the cassette cover for it. Heidi put a note out. I don't know if anybody's a Star Trek fan like I am. I'm a huge Trekkie, have been for many years. And a few years ago, I was made aware of a fan-based series called Star Trek Continues. Don't know if anybody's ever heard of it, but StarTrekContinues.com. Check it out. And they have done a very high production cost version of Star Trek, which carries on from the original sort of Bill Shatner and Leonard Nimoy 60s series. It continues in the same 4x3 format, using the same types of sets and everything. And what Heidi did was put a note out to the guy that plays Captain Kirk, Vic Monaghan, who plays Captain Kirk in the Star Trek Continues show, to ask if it would be possible to use any of their visuals in the game. Given that we'll be selling the game through a non-profit organization again, Chronosoft, and they agreed. They actually said, yes, you absolutely can use our visuals. And so just to give you, I don't know if this will come up. I might share something on my screen if this doesn't come up very well. But here's our current draft of what that's going to look like.
Neat.
Now, that is impressive stuff. You might have noticed there that I've been using a certain Aquarius Draw to try and come up with some graphics for loading screens and things like that, which has helped a lot. So Matt's helped a lot with that piece of software. So basically, we'll probably release this in the next couple of months or so. I want to give Doomsday Defender a bit of a run first, and you'll be able to. The good thing is that when you buy the cassettes, you are entitled to a free digital download. And what I tend to do is once they've been out for a while, is you can get the free digital download anyway from my io.h site. So you can certainly get Aquarius Worm and Bombcatcher 2 as a download for free. Doomsday Defender will come out in the next month or so as a free download as well. So everybody with emulators or a micro expander, you can do. What I'm also going to do is, for the first time ever as well, is produce TZX versions of my games, so that anybody who has this device, which is fairly new to the market, so this is the Aquamax, which is an SD card reader which emulates a tape deck. So it's an Arduino based unit for the Aquarius. It means that you'll be able to stream my games from this as if they were tapes as well. Although that can take a fairly long time because the Aquarius trying to remember what the baud rate for Aquarius is. Is it 600 baud it reads tapes at? It's quite slow.
I thought it was 12, but it may be.
It might be 12. Yeah,
Yeah.
It might be 12. I certainly know that Doomsday Defender takes a good 5 minutes to load. Is it 4 minutes 50 seconds or something to load from cassette? In fact, because it's quite a big game, the amount of tape, I don't know if you can see that, but look at this. That's probably the biggest amount of tape I've seen on a cassette for a long time. And when I was beta testing this, that was the longest 5 minutes of my life waiting for that, waiting for that front screen to appear to make sure it would load. So I mean, again, hats off to Milli doing a cartridge-based game. I did look into creating cartridges for the Aquarius when I first started doing Aquariworm a few years back, but they were just, I got to be honest, they were just too expensive to produce. And although I think people are okay paying, you know, like six quid for one of these, but if you want to then charge, you know, it was going to end up being something like 20 to 25 quid for a cartridge. I just didn't think that would be what people would want.
You know, what's interesting about the Aquarius is that I think you can actually get those machines relatively cheap right now. Is that true?
Yeah, they're anywhere from 100 to 150. Some people are asking an awful lot, and supply is different in Europe and the UK than it is. For instance, the UK can't get a mini expander or controllers to save their lives.
That's because, unlike you guys, so you tended to get it as a bundle pack, didn't
right.
you? Yeah, see, we didn't. So when we bought an Aquarius, I mean, certainly when I got my Aquarius, all you got was the machine, nothing else. Yeah.
Well, I do think that there is a market for an all-in-one cartridge that can download bundles. That's why I'm hoping.
What is a download bundle?
Well, so rather than getting a cartridge or a tape, and I love them, I think it's really nice, but I'm going to share something really quickly here. Hold on, if I can do that. There we go. Let's see, where is my little Aquarius emulator? It just needs to be mono. So I have this Aquarius emulator, and this has basically the same components of the micro.
I'm not seeing anything on the share screen, mate. It's just blank.
Just blank. So that's not showing anything?
Nope.
Huh.
Blank screen.
All right. Well, let me try that again. Thanks for. My students also say that too. It's like, what are you doing? We're not seeing anything.
I don't know if Evie's the same. Are you? Just blank.
Yeah, it just said that you've shared your screen, but there was no screen.
But didn't show anything yet.
Hold on, but I think I know what I need to do. So here's, can you see that?
Oh,
yeah.
Loud buzzing.
What's that?
Loud buzzing. Very loud buzzing.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think it's because of the sound. So let me not turn the sound on. I think that was the virtual AY chip that was buzzing. So I'm going to turn that one. So Evie, what I was suggesting, can you see the emulator there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, a download or a game bundle would be something where you could do this. Sorry, let me spell that correctly. And you probably won't be able to hear the music. Ooh. But this is going through a series of screens, and they're just these are the same sorts of output that Aquarius Draw can do. And I'll show you the basic here. This is all done in BASIC.
Mm-hmm.
And Roy, all of your stuff is BASIC, correct? Or do you use USRs?
It's 95% BASIC with a smaller number of USRs.
Okay, cool.
What's the USR?
A user-defined subroutine.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So these are the sample screens that I put on Aquarius Draw, but I bundled them into into a screen. So let me show you what the code looks like. What I'm doing is I'm using the Aquarius Basic, and if you had a package that you could put onto, whether it's a micro SD or a USB, that people should be able to run this if these extended load routines. Notice that the first line there is load, not C load.
Mhm.
And it allows you to tell where in RAM you can load that SCR file. An SCR file just loads it into the character and color memory starting at 1228.
Well,
So where do those
I
come? I'm sorry.
was going to say, is this USB basic, Sean?
This is USB basic, yes.
Yeah. So for Evie's benefit, this is what comes with the micro expander. So you get a new version of basic that you can launch, which gives you all these additional commands. But if you write something in it, like Sean's done here, it can only be run from it. You can't encapsulate it and give it to somebody who doesn't have a mini expander.
Exactly. And
So
that's,
you want like a more generic format that I think what would make the most sense is to have like a generic spec that you could then implement.
right, I agree. I think that because what that would do is then that completely breaks down the 4K, 16K, 32K barrier that both Roy and William have to deal with, because you can automatically load in new pieces as you need it.
Yeah. So for the Commodore, I had this thing called extended data, and I think I had like one person who actually used it. This guy named Oscar from some South American country. I can't remember which one right now. But yeah, what I like, I had this vision for the original Backbit API that, you know, okay, here you can access a ton of data, you know, and I just had this vision like people are going to use it. And then what I realized after that was that a lot of what people were asking for was not to access a lot of data, but they wanted to access data extremely fast, like faster than the cycles of the computer.
Then use a PC.
And that might be one reason why I haven't messed around with taking on RAM expansion for the Commodore, because I don't know, like just my thought was like, why do you need like crazy massive throughput? Like, isn't just large amounts of data enough?
Yeah. I'm the same way. I think if you have, you know, it's like when I teach my students in kind of the intro, you know, your RAM is like the desktop. That's what you can spread all the stuff out on and look at all of it at once. But you still have this file cabinet over here. You can always take stuff off and put it in. And yes, it takes time to do that, but that's what you do. You can't possibly look at more than this at a time anyway.
What subject are you teaching?
I teach algorithms, and I also teach, and it's right now it's Java based, but I teach algorithms, and then every other year I'll also teach an intro to Java programming. So
I did a brief stint in Java.
yeah, you know, it's the common denominator. I would love to see, you know, a JVM on an Aquarius. I just don't know, you know, I don't know if it's even worth it. But so you were going to ask a question about these PSG commands. Is that what you were asking?
Me or Roy?
Evie, you said, what are those?
Yeah.
No. My question was, so you have like load and run. You already answered it. It's from the
Gotcha.
USB base.
I think what would be ideal for us here, I think it stems back to a question we asked you earlier, Evie, is because Sean, if we could freeze the state of the machine and have that as a deployable package, you would get everything that's currently contained in RAM, including that USB basic, would you not?
You would, yeah. And again,
Yeah,
that's
so-
where that 4K memory hole is.
Yeah.
You know, you can kind of do with it what you want.
Yeah, but
So-
if there was a way of capturing, regardless of what language you're using to develop your content, we really want to be able to share it with people who don't necessarily have everything that you designed it in the first place.
So
therefore,
my hesitation to do freezers is that
Yeah.
freezers, freezers, as far as the Commodore was like being able to stop a program, and then be able to recreate it. And that creates a whole bunch of issues for your IO devices that don't have their state recreated properly, and your interrupt states that are not necessarily correct. That's a whole separate thing. But as far as like the, a useful way to experience programs, you can serve ROM and you can access an IO device. So, I mean, the Z80 makes it really easy, like at a machine code level, to talk to a device. So I think, standardizing the IO protocol, well, it depends on your like, because I use assembly language to write my communication routines. So if I have to make the communication more complicated, that actually becomes a lot of work. Whereas most of the things that happen on my cartridge are like a request gets triggered, and then my cartridge stops serving data for a while, goes and does some processing, and then comes back. So yeah, I mean, I guess there's two things here. One is the initial loading of the program, but I mean, it sounds like you want to design something that's ultra portable, so people could build their own little homebrew devices and be able to run this stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the, and that's my ultimate goal. Basic is a great entree. Obviously, Roy has kind of perfected that workflow, but he's still limited to his 4K, 16K, 13K space. He doesn't really have a standardized library that he can count on that everybody would have. However, and maybe it is the micro expander. I think it's got some issues. I think USB Basic is good. In fact, I would love to see a plug and play replacement of USB Basic that can be just put into a stock Aquarius. Then you've got to figure out where you're going to, put this CH376 adapter along with all the glue logic to make it work. But with that, then people could have one cartridge that has those expended commands, and then they could themselves write. Again, that was just a bunch of basic commands.
I don't know how connected you are to the Commodore world, but in the Commodore world, there's this cartridge called Easy Flash.
Yes.
And that's pretty much the most popular format. And you've got, your bank switching ROM, and you have access to RAM, which is, I guess you can save things out to Flash, which is not the most convenient thing to emulate.
No.
Like an EEPROM.
Yeah.
I've got an Easy Flash for my 64. In fact, I even use it in my SX64. So you've got one in the background there. But recently, I've used the Kung Fu Flash more often than the Easy Flash now, because the Kung Fu supports the Easy Flash format as well.
So a little history on the Kung Fu Flash. So my Backbit came out before the Kung Fu Flash. I don't know how much they were inspired by me or not, and then I know actually my cartridge is actually inspired based on some devices that came before, like the ID64, and there were very. Someone in the Commodore community said that they blackballed these SD card devices for Commodore. I don't know what that even means.
That's ridiculous, yeah.
But see that then Kung Fu Flash, obviously it's open source and a lot of people are making them. And then that's when I realized I had to make the Backbit Pro, because the original Backbit had like about 128K of RAM available to serve data to the cartridge, and that just wasn't enough. I tried all kinds of tricks to get Easy Flash programs to work, like automatically searching for the ROM hooks and replacing them in the code. And anyway, but I just gave up, and I realized I had to do things out of RAM. Although Kung Fu Flash is a weird way of like reflashing itself to play the games. So you see, reminds me a little bit of how the EverDrive does it. Like you start a game and you have to wait for it to program the flash, and then you go.
Yeah.
And it has one advantage, which is when you write out save changes from the game, they get written to the flash immediately.
Yeah.
Whereas on Backbit, if you're like save your high scores, you have to press the button on the cartridge before it actually gets committed to the cartridge.
Cool. You got your Backbit coffee mug.
I got my Backbit. This is the one Backbit mug in existence.
Oh, your one merch? Did you get a free sample from
It's not a free sample, but see, I have cats here, and the cats kept. I got a ceramic one, and the cats knocked it down like twice, so I got this indestructible one.
As cats will do. Anyway, so that's kind of my grand vision. I want to open this up so that, again, people don't have to buy an Aquarius. I would hope that they would, but I would like to break down people's ability to do something. You know, if you don't want to do basic, that's fine. I think the basic commands in the USB basic are pretty great. It's got built-in in and out statements. You do have to understand how what is it? It converts to the signed integers, choose complement stuff to make sure that you understand the addresses that it's hitting. But it's got the portable sound generator, and the one that I'm using actually has two PSGs. I mapped them to F6, F7.
Two PSGs.
Huh?
Two?
Yeah, two AY chips. So I've got one at, and that's one of the things that I'm working on. I mentioned earlier that I reverse engineered the micro expander. My goal is to replace this glue logic here with a GAL, remove this back because you don't really need that, and then put a second, and mine's been pulled off, but put a second PSG that responds to IO F8 and F9, so you could actually have 6 voices, which would be really helpful for some people. And the PT3 format actually supports it. It embeds to, yeah, it's Pro Tracker 3, the same as Vortex 2. And he's got some built-in code that you can, if you go to the Vortex Tracker 2 website, he's got some Z80 code that you can use for that.
The trackers I enjoyed most growing up were definitely the Amiga. I never had an Amiga, but I remember I had this friend that had a Pro Audio Spectrum, and when I heard those, you know, mod and S3M files through the Pro Audio Spectrum, I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, I think it was the artifacting of the you know, converting the samples to different pitches that I actually like the sound of the artifacting.
Yeah, me too.
And so my backsid, my SID recreation has a bit of artifacting in the square waves. And the reason it is artifacting is because it's generating them at around 30,000 times a second instead of 1 million, which is what the original hardware did. And so, yeah, so if anyway, so with audio, unless you're doing extensive filtering or crazy high sampling rates, you're going to get these artifacts. And the irony is that some people have complained to me. They say, you know, I don't. There's something wrong with the sound. You got aliasing. But I kind of like how that sounds.
Right, and there's people who, you know, will sell you a $150, you know, keyboard pedal that will do the exact same thing. So people actually want to.
Well, I know, like ARMSID for Commodore, I'm sure they do some kind of band limiting on their square waves.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know. I don't like filtering. You know, I want to maintain as much of the natural sound of that square wave as I can. I don't want to do harsh band limiting on the square waves. So I'd rather just, you know, make another product that has, you know, a one megahertz sample rate that'll do a perfect square wave.
Yeah. Nowhere but up.
No, what?
I said there's no way but up with the.
No way but up. Yeah.
So Roy, did you get to finish what you're talking about in terms of the Star Trek game, or Parsec, I think you're calling it?
No, I'm calling it Warp Factor.
Warp Factor, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So don't know if I've got, let me just see if I've got a screenshot to share or something like that. So to get a better idea of what the cover is going to look like, let's see if it will share this. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so thanks to Heidi for designing that front cover, and thanks to Matt's application helping me design the picture of Vic as Captain Kirk here. So I did manage to squeeze this into 16K of RAM. It was a struggle. Let me see if I've got a screenshot of the game itself, which should be instantly recognizable for anybody who had any other 8-bit machine in the known universe apart from the Aquarius,
Right.
because they all got versions of this back in the day.
And did you find the original code in an archive somewhere?
Yes, I did. So I found two sources which were interesting. So I got the original source code, which is by by a guy called Mike Mayfield, and that original source code has been is open to the public to look at. And I also found a piece of code from a guy called Michael Sternberg, who did an original port for the Aquarius a few years back for a retro competition, I think it was, but it was very much a direct line for line translation, which is not what I wanted to do. I want to take advantage of what the Aquarius can actually give us, but that did give me some great pointers. Let me share this. Or not. Let's try that again. It's not actually showing me the window I want to share. Oh, there we go. So if you can see that. So what happens in this Aquarius version of Warp Factor is the screen will be green when you're not in trouble. And it will turn red when there's a red alert. And the reason I've chosen this screenshot here is because it gives us a fair amount of information. So you can see the Enterprise at location B there, that's you. And you have the little Klingon birds of prey. You've got 2 birds of prey there, some stars, and the letterbox is in fact a space station where you can dock. And so the principles of the game is simply you have a set number of turns, which are reflected as star dates, in order to destroy a randomized number of Klingons. And each time you start the game, it randomizes where those Klingons are, it randomizes where you start, it randomizes where the suns are, which are obstacles you can't warp through, and also where the space stations are. And the idea is to try and kill as many Klingons as you can within the time limit to achieve a rank to move on to the next level. It's as simple as that. But it is a turn-based game. And it's actually quite good fun to play. So the graphics are improved on the Aquarius version. It has sound effects. I'm ironing out a few bugs right now, because one of the most annoying ones I've had was somewhere I've forgotten to convert a number into an integer. And every now and again, you'll shoot a Klingon and it'll say, you have inflicted 3.173925 points of damage. I don't really care about that. I just want to know that I've hit it with 3 points of damage. So yeah, and you have phasers to shoot, which you don't have to aim, but you do have to tell the bridge computer how much energy you want to use in your phasers. And you have photon torpedoes, which you can fire blindly, but that's not recommended. You can aim photon torpedoes, but it's tricky because you have gravitational disturbances from each of those suns, for example, which will knock the course of the torpedo out. So it's quite a good strategy game. It takes quite a long time to play and to master, because it's got a fair number of keys to use. And it was a struggle fitting it into 16K of RAM, I got to be honest. But I have managed, and I think I have some ridiculously small amount. I think I've currently got 12 whole bytes free once you run the game, I'm pretty sure I've only got 12 bytes free. So it's been good fun to do. I've enjoyed doing it, especially looking at multiple sources to try and come up with how to overcome some of the maths. Because when you start plotting Klingon ships versus them shooting at you versus you shooting at them versus the gravitational pull of a sun, things start to get a bit complicated. And the Aquarius, as we know, is extremely limited. And so there's been a few occasions where I've found that 72 character limit per line a bit of a struggle, a bit of a headache, to be honest. But we've got there. As I say, the game's almost finished. I've got a few little bugs to iron out. I need to iron out more of those integer mishaps, but apart from that, it's doing really well. I'm quite chuffed with it, and I think with Star Trek Continues allowing us to use some of their artwork on the cover, that's going to help sell it, I think. Star Trek Continues is a non-profit fan episode anyway. Chronosoft are a non-profit making software house, so I think we're going to do quite well there. I'm probably going to do a 32K version of it, because I've actually got quite good at designing some of the full screen graphics. I know you can't move them, although some of those some of those SCR screens that you can flip now in USB Basic are looking quite promising. So I might try do something with that. But for now, just flat images that are going to get drawn through basic routines. So to actually have pictures of the Enterprise and pictures of the Klingon birds of prey. In fact, there is one in the game now. Let me just grab that to share. Where is it? What have I done with it?
You could do a micro expander version.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. A micro expander version for people who have the 32. Oh, you can never find. You can never find what you want, especially when somebody says, "Can you share that?" Yes, I can, but then no, I can't. What's this one? Let's have a look.
Looks like Richard Chandler wants you to port Elite to the Aquarius next.
Oh my God, does he? I knew he'd say something like that, because that's my other biggest love, of course, because I collect Elite. I've got all 31 versions of Elite, and of course, definitely doesn't exist on the Aquarius. So here's an example of the loading screen for Warp Factor. So if you step back about 3 foot and look at the screen, then that is a mightily impressive picture for an Aquarius to produce. I think it's instantly recognizable. And I've done a similar one for a Klingon bird of prey when you get killed. But for a 32K version, I think it'd be quite nice to have these interspersed into the game. So doing maybe death scenes or planetary scenes or explosions or something like that to try and bring it out a bit. But because of the way the Aquarius draws these, of course, you're talking, you could be talking 2K per screen, so you got to be a bit careful about what it is you actually, what we do or what I do or don't create.
So is your requirement more just program space, or do you need a lot of RAM?
That's a good question. Both really, but more RAM more than anything else.
But would you ever need more than 32K of RAM?
Oh, now there's a question. I never thought I'd need more than 4K. Then I never thought I'd need more than 8K. I definitely never going to need more than 16K. And now I'm thinking,
I mean, just
32K game.
I mean, because I can envision like defining a standard as far as like, okay, you got your 32K RAM, and then you got your bankable 16K ROM on top of that. I mean, that would be like a pretty decent like generic format. But then, Sean, I don't know if you're like more interested in like the basic side of things and being able to have commands that do things.
Well, I think, I mean, I'm not. My sweet spot would be to, and I'm headed there right now, is to have something that can compile down to machine code. So I'm learning both machine code and also working with the C compiler, SDCC. But I do think it's important that as an entry point, people have basic and/or DOS commands that can have them do something interesting, you know. So I wrote that in BASIC, the thing that I showed you, just to show that it could be done. Obviously, that could be much quicker if you had had it compiled in machine code, and I do have that as well too. But I think that there is the opportunity within the Aquarius to have a more structured banking RAM standard that people could use, so long as it had some basic or extended basic or USB basic routines that could be used to get stuff in and out of there. People, again, when you're dealing with a 16-bit address space, people have a hard time understanding without examples how you break beyond that. And one of the things I said earlier was one of the common paradigms for doing that is you set the page flip for each of those banks at a common location, so you never pull the RAM out from underneath you. You always go to that, and you know that within each of those banks, you can always go back here and at least get to the page you need to. And typically, you won't touch the low end unless you're really creative about doing that. You leave the mid and the high to do graphics or any other things. And in the background, if you do have some sort of a disk access system, then obviously the Aquarius doesn't have any sort of DMA, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to be clever about how and where you get it in there. Then you can load those in the background, and then just, I don't want to say manually do your page flips, but that's effectively what you're doing. Most of the time you're setting an out address to whatever the IO address is for the particular bank you're dealing with. But that's why I had set it up for three banks of 16, each with 64 pages, because you can handle all those easily within a full byte. So. Did that answer your question, or did I?
Yeah, I mean, you're throwing out a bunch of ideas, so I'm pretty much like, I'm not super opinionated on like how it has to happen. My ideas so far are like, pretty much going on the example that I've seen on other systems, like, like there's the Easy Flash or the Atari Max cartridges, and there's all kinds of systems that have banking, and you just basically poke a location, and then it changes out the bank, and you just define, which areas of memory you want to use. And then the other approach is like, you have that USB basic, and if I analyze that, and I don't know if there's sources for that available, but
there's the guy who did the basic disassembly, Reverend Curtis, as he's known. He is looking at the extended basic. There is absolutely source on Bruce Abbott's site. He's in New Zealand, but all of his sources is available, and it's pretty well commented too. It's an ASM with really good comments.
For the USB basic?
Yeah, and he shows how he uses the CH376 module. You're basically bit banging it. So it's all there. I just haven't had a chance to. I do want to bake it into this at some point, but the micro expander, except for some of the issues that folks are running into with certain versions of the ROM OS, this kind of just works. It's just there's not enough of them out there. There's not enough people actually making them and selling them as fully assembled on eBay.
Yeah, so I do have the Backbit for pre-order now, and I'm expecting some chips in about a month, and then I will be getting some more chips. And so basically, the chips that I'm getting in a month, I ordered about 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And they're only sending me about half. They're only sending me about half of what I ordered.
And which chips are you particularly waiting on? Because I know which ones I'm waiting on.
Some STM32,
Yep.
pretty much the latest generation of chips.
Yeah, for me, like I said, it's the CPLDs and particularly the Spartan Xilinx, because that's the project that I'm working on. We're trying to do some new stuff with video. I don't know if it can be done externally. I mean, it's probably going to be an overhaul of the system board, but again, since we've got the reverse engineering of the motherboard, we can always modify that. And unfortunately, it's in Eagle right now. So that's why I took down notes on the bow tie guy from DigiKey so I can bone up on my KiCad skills to make it a little more open for folks. From what I understand, KiCad is actually better at doing the rendering and getting it into other tools like Fusion 360. And that's part of your workflow process too, right? For your
I actually use OpenSCAD.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I literally code my 3D prints
In G code?
in, is that what it's, no, in OpenSCAD code.
Oh, so you're okay, gotcha.
I like write cylinder such and such.
You're insane.
Yeah, and it takes a long time to render too.
Yes, it does. I like my GUI tools.
It's just kind of a trial and error process.
Good. Well, the quality on your prints are really good. I'm kind of envious.
This is my case for the, so I have a Tandy adapter, and this is the case for the Tandy adapter. And I've tried to be lazy about my adapters and just make them simple boards. But some of these machines, the cartridge slot is like really deep inside there. So you really need some kind of case to get it in there.
And then what about, do any of your adapters have any supplemental hardware on them, or are they just?
Yeah, so I try to do pass through whenever I can, but like Amstrad has this really gnarly copy protection. And somebody figured out that if you just have a negative edge triggered gate on one pin and send that as a toggle to another pin, it just totally bypasses the protection, which makes me think that like inside their hardware, whatever the thing is that's determining the state that it needs to be in to pass the cipher, that state switching is causing a glitch. And so, anyway, so I managed to find a single 7400 series chip that will implement that, and that works. And then like for TI-99, there's a transistor on the back because the reset operates at -5 volts. So I stuck a photo transistor on there.
And then for the Aquarius, is it just a pass through?
Yeah, Aquarius is just pass
Awesome.
through.
Very cool.
Yeah, I mean the worst, my Backbit cartridges has been pretty reliable. The worst things that have happened are I had to improve my method for soldering the fingers on, because what solder would like flow down the solder pads to the edge of the board, so it wouldn't quite bubble up and it wouldn't quite make good contacts with the pin. And then the other weird issue I've had is the clock crystal sometimes just gives out, and actually just pulling the battery out and putting it back makes it happy.
Now, I know I talked to you a couple years ago about SMD, and you're still doing SMD stuff by hand, right? You're not reflowing.
I'm not doing any kind of oven bake or anything. Some of my boards are now assembly. They have parts put on in the factory, but I've never had the CPUs done from assembly.
Yeah, most of those suppliers won't even touch them anyway. I know with GLC PCB, they'll handle the little stuff, which is awesome.
They actually added a feature in the last year or so, which is you can tell them to buy parts for you and hold them, except then the chip shortage happened.
Yeah, that little thing.
I don't know, I was watching some videos of EEV blog.
Yeah.
And what's his name, Davy Jones?
Crikey, yeah.
He was saying how he has some factory that does the surface mount for him. He just sends the chips over. So I imagine it's always been an issue for me of meeting demand, and so far the last couple years that I've been doing Backbit, it's all just been by hand. Though I have this suspicion when the word gets out that this cartridge works on like 15 machines, that I might get a little bit more of a following. I mean, as it is right now, I get sales trickle in from people that I've never heard of, and so that makes me happy that my customers must be spreading the word.
So what's your number one tip on hand SMD? What's your magic tip to make it work?
Okay, well,
with a bridge.
I have to confess my sins to the lead devil. I've been using leaded solder.
6040 works great. It is
I was gonna switch to bismuth, and then I had all these problems, and I said, screw it, I'm just gonna go back to lead, because I don't know, I read that bismuth, if your chip heats up to like 90 degrees Celsius, the bismuth starts to melt. No. I'm planning on going back to it at some point, but because I figure actually that the irony, the biggest problem I had with the Backbit Pro that caused me like a couple months of intense frustration is that my debugger probe apparently had some incompatibilities with these latest generation STM chips. And it was just like, just about half the time that I tried to program the chip for the first time, it would fail. Just no real reason. And I thought it was something wrong with my soldering, or it turned out it was the debugging probe all along. Anyway, so okay, as for soldering surface mount, the method I figured out that makes things pretty doable by hand soldering is that I use a solder paste, except I don't, I actually buy a solder paste, but then I add flux to it. So I use that really yellow, really gooey, resiny flux. Mm-hmm. Not like the greasy kind, but I mean, but like just the really like resiny, it's just, you know, like the tree sap style.
Yeah, it smells like tree sap when you burn it. Yeah.
And it's like really thick, and so I mix that up with the solder paste, and if you use like a toothpick and just mix it a whole bunch, it gets, you know, it gets to kind of a you know, semi-liquidy but still pretty solid, and basically depending on the amount of flux you add to it, you can get it just the right consistency. So you want it where it's a little bit solid but still, you know, not quite runny but not quite solid, and so you get this really nice consistency. And then I put a whole bunch of flux on the board, and then I put the chip on there, and I use tweezers to get it right in the right place, and I use a microscope.
Yeah, I've got that same USB microscope you do.
So I use a microscope, and then I get an exact right place, and then I solder just a few pins, and I don't solder the end pins, because the end pins are often like the ground, that if you have a ground plane, it takes a lot more heat to get in there. Yeah. And not only that, but the end pins tend to like bend real easily. So I solder like maybe like a center pin on each side of the chip. And once the chip is on there real good, then actually, well, okay, so I do this crazy thing. I take the paste and I stick it on the top of the chip, which kind of messes up the silk screen on the top of the chip, but that way I can just dip in there on the top of the chip and then go right to some of the pins.
So you actually dunk the chip? You actually dunk the chip in your...
No. So first I put the chip on there with just flux.
Gotcha.
And then I take a little dab of my solder paste at just the right consistency, and I put that dab on the top of the chip, not touching the pins at all. And that way, you know, it's like a painter's palette. I can dip the soldering iron in there and just solder, you know, just a few legs, and then the chip is staying in place, so it won't move. And then I take more of the paste and I just go all the way around. And if you have just the right consistency, then, you know, the pins will soak up the solder, and you won't have extra solder, but you'll have enough. If you get just, I mean, that's the experience part of it, is if you have just the right amount of solder to flux, then the pins will soak up the solder. And the thing is, with your PCB design, you have to make sure that the pads are extra long.
Right.
If you use the normal footprints, you're never going to get in there.
Yeah. So so when you're laying down a typical STM32, how often do you get a bridge?
Solder bridge?
Yeah.
All the time. But
okay. And then you just drag it out like everybody else does.
Yeah. I know like early on I read some suggestions to use like a wick, but the problem with the wick is that it can totally destroy the motherboard.
Yeah, it pulls up traces pretty easily. Yeah.
But yeah, if you have just a lot of flux and using that really sticky, gooey resin flux, that's really the number one tip, is use a ton of flux, because even if you have bridges, if you use a ton of flux, it can come off of there.
It's going to float off. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, and the other thing is I would recommend don't put the solder paste right on the pins, because it might go underneath the chip and form a bridge, like kind of underneath the chip or behind the legs where you can't see it. So that's why I put the solder on the top of the chip, because that way then you can apply the solder to the edge of the pins. Because if you have a bunch of solder paste on top of the pins and then it gets behind the pins, that can be a big problem.
Yeah,
Because
I've seen that same problem. So I tend to use the solder mask when I do that, the steel ones when I can afford it. But I don't always have the same layout, and like I'll need one for QFP 144, for the CPLDs. What I found is, fortunately I have access to a laser cutter, which I know not a lot of people do, but I can just use regular laser transparency and then cut the solder masks myself, which is nice. But even those, I will easily on one of those CPLDs with like 144 pins or even just like 100 pins. Yeah, I'll have a lot of under pin. It's like in the knee of the pins that solder will sit there.
Yeah, see, I used to have that problem until I started sticking a blob of solder on the top of the chip, and then I can go dip in there and then paint the very edge of the legs.
There you go. So everybody who wants a soldering tip, use your the top of your chip.
Well, I mean, my first tip was really just go crazy on the flux. Like you can't overdo it on the flux. And then I started having these really messy boards, so I go back and I clean it with alcohol. And I got a
alcohol's expensive these days, though.
Oh, I know. I got a not great suggestion to mix acetone with alcohol, but acetone really messes up the silk screen.
It does. So here's my magic tip. There is you can either use simple green, or there's a product that I use called Crud Cutter. It's water based, but it does much better than, I mean, if you've ever done a flux cleanup with alcohol, sometimes you get kind of a haze over your board and it doesn't look bright and pop. What I do is,
my boards are black. So.
Oh, well, you're lucky there. We tend to use a lot of blue for the Aquarius, but for me, what I'll do is I will use, after I'm done, everything's all in place. I'll hit it with this Crud Cutter, which comes in a pump, and it's really good for that. And then I'll toothbrush it all out. And I have no problem with running my boards underwater. If there's anything like an inductor or some sort of a tack switch or something like that, I'll tend to avoid that, but I'll get it completely wet. It looks really nice. And then I'll just hit it with compressed air and let it air dry for,
I tried out getting one of those ultrasonic machines, and the damn thing was just way too noisy. And then I got turpentine, and that stuff is toxic. Like there are a few things that are really, really, really toxic, like specifically for me, which are like things that are fine particles. Like I got these like Mr. Clean style erasers, but they're these cheap knockoffs from China, and it's like just these little powder. Like the powder is just some of the most toxic stuff I've ever encountered.
Yeah, I can't do with epoxy at all. For some reason, I get blotches.
You can't do with what?
I can't work with epoxy at all because I get blotches. I'm like one of 3% of the population that has an allergic reaction to epoxy. So.
How about just like crazy glue?
Crazy glue, no, it's fine. Like if I cut myself, I'll use that as a Band-Aid sometimes because it's work. That's where it came from. It was developed in the Korean or the Vietnam War to suture up wounds. So, well, thank you for those tips. Well, it's coming up on 10 o'clock. I don't think we need to go to the full 11 o'clock hour. So thanks to 8-Bit Milli, William Hicks. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, you can take a look at that. Thanks to Evie Salomon from Evie's Review, and the ever gracious loud Scots bloke, Roy Templeman, showing us his 3 games. We're going to try and do these a little more regularly. I don't know if we're going to have them quarterly like we did last year, but I think as the chip shortage eases up a little bit, maybe I can actually buy a new car to replace my dying Ford Escape, my Ford Escape, not Escort, Escape, because I'd love to have an electric car, but I just can't afford it right now. As the chip shortages open up, I think we'll see more products out there. I know Ricky El Kassam has developed a great tape emulator that is both a cartridge It'll also serve up the Caq files, but it's more for a tape interface. There, Roy's got one. It's really, really innovative, and I know some other folks are working on some interesting stuff as well too. So,
yeah, and so whatever like format you decide that you want programs to be packaged in, you know, I'm happy to support whatever format. The main limitations that I have are just you know, just the not having like a real parallel processing. So it's like, you know, either I'm serving data or I'm doing operations, but not both at the same time. So as long as it passes that restriction, I can pretty much, you know, interface
cool.
with most things.
Definitely Caq file. I think that's probably the most
Oh
common.
yeah, that's
Universal.
Yeah, and so I will have more of the Backbit Pro cartridges available for the general public in about a month. But there's a very limited supply, and then after that it'll probably be a few more months. But I do Backbit full time. This is like everything that I do. I don't have a day job, so this is what I'm going to be doing for the long haul. And you know, I do focus on value, so you know, the value of the product. So you know, you buy the Backbit cartridge once, and then the adapters are all pretty cheap. So, and you know, like my goal is to connect people. You know, like say someone's a Commodore fan or an Atari fan, and they buy the Backbit cartridge, and they say, oh well, you can use this on the Mattel Aquarius, and then it's like, okay, you just get the adapter. Now you can play with the Mattel Aquarius. And so, you know, it's one of my goals is just to reduce that learning curve so that people can, you know, go from one system to another system without as much of a learning curve.
Excellent. Any final words, Mr. Templeman?
The Aquarius is awesome. Go buy one.
Or at least download Richard Chandler, and he's been very active in the chat. Hey, Richard. At least download Aqualite. It actually has a home on the internet now, which is awesome. He's working with Mac Wharton. Mac has aquarius.je/aqualite/ and then you should be able to see the page that has the, I'll actually type this over here in Facebook while I'm doing this. You can get the latest version. It's a great tool. It is command line executable, which is awesome. Works in a number of different formats. The one that's linked on Mac's site is going to be the Windows version, of course, but
it does actually run under Wine on Linux because I use it under Wine.
good. Okay. Oh, it does. Okay. Let's see. That's Aquarius JE/Aqualite. He's very responsive to bug requests. So kudos, Richard. Thanks. We hope you keep up the good work. Other than that, thanks everybody for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple of months. Bye, everybody.